What if Link is dying? Not symbolically or metaphorically, as some claim we see in Majora's Mask. Not chronologically either, like some offshoot in the timeline from a lost battle. And not in the gamified sense either, where the game over screen greets players where their avatar meets the demise in one of 1,000 scenarios that we've played out over in the last 35 years of adventures in the land of Hyrule. No, I mean actually dying. Before this gets too dark, let's all agree that this is simply a theory. But if you care to hear it out, the reasons, the evidence, are not as outlandish as they might first seem. Let's begin our journey on the first Breath of the Wild 2 What If theory in a series that I hope will bring you new mysteries, secrets, and ideas to discuss as we continue our journey on the road to the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Let's start with arguably the strongest, but likely to be the most divisive, piece of evidence for this theory. Like everyone else, I've watched the two trailers shown regarding the sequel time and time again, with a few things seemingly out of place that appear to offer clues about this tightly guarded sequel and the storyline at the heart of our next adventure. There's been some outstanding theories and breakdowns of the few minutes of trailer footage, and somehow the community has been able to piece together a cohesive and intriguing plot with the facts at hand. Yet despite this, I haven't been able to shake the itch that there's more there. And the whole thing has felt like a puzzle waiting to be pieced together. Maybe you feel like that too. That maybe there's more to what we've seen, and whilst it could all just be a theory, maybe it could also help us piece together more clues as part of the greater whole. So let's start by saying, what if Link's arm is not green after being imbued with a spirit energy or infected with malice, causing a mysterious hand in the trailer to unite with him in a symbiotic relationship, but something else entirely? The more I look at the arm, the more it looks like something much more real that exists in our reality. It looks like a limb drained of blood, almost decaying, growing more lifeless over time. I know it sounds gruesome, and I mean no offense with what I'm saying, but not unlike a limb might appear following an accident or an unfortunate ailment or condition, Link's arm could be darkening with decay, and the reason for the new equipment or jewelry he now sports, as it would be needed to support the deterioration he now faces. Pretty grim, I know. The thing is, it appears to worsen at points, and although it can be argued as clothing, which is debatable, the scene in which Link is fighting the ceiling blob of doom with his cool new fire shield, I'd almost swear that both arms are looking the worse for wear. But there's more, much more that supports this idea. Hyrule Historia contains a section that addresses point blank the resurrection of Ganon, as his horde laid Hyrule to waste in a plot to bring him back from the dead. It states, "It is said that Ganon can be resurrected by sacrificing Link, the one who defeated him, and sprinkling the hero's blood over his ashes. A blood sacrifice to resurrect Ganon." Going back to the trailers for the sequel, which even the most ardent fan would have to agree is selective in details, we could all agree that it appears to show the true Ganondorf in what I'd describe as full Mumra pose, coming to life and appearing to be resurrected prior to starting earthquakes, flying castles, and just general badness spewing forth to threaten Hyrule in a terror worse than we faced in Breath of the Wild. So what if that resurrection is not the result of the mysterious green hand simply releasing its alleged grip on Ganon's chest, but more so arising from tasting the blood of the hero? This would explain the impetus for his movement and return to form, while Link's arm appears to be shy of a few pints and ties in perfectly with one of the most underrated and avoided topics from the first game, the Blood Moon. Put simply, the Blood Moon is explained to be a mysterious phenomenon linked to Ganon and his malice that coats the moon blood red with the noted effect of raising the monster hordes from the dead and also inspiring this charming fellow to act like a crazed lunatic. It's not a stretch to suggest that the Blood Moon resurrects the horde through the blood sacrificed of the victims who fall to the whim of these malevolent creatures. And so a similar ritual with the hero could spark the return of the new King of Darkness, as his husk is re-energized with the thriving blood of the hero, bearer of courage. But how, might you ask? Well, there's a myriad of possible reasons or answers, ranging from any unknown scene that's been left out of the trailers to the possibility of the super helpful green hand that everyone thinks is good and righteous actually being bad and hacking into Link with those sharp looking claws. It's all speculation. While we're on the point, I can't help shake the feeling that the rat shown in the first trailer gets an awful lot of screen time, almost more than the main trio. He's seen following Link and Zelda as they journey into the depths, and even scurrying away as the Malice Plague lashes out, consuming all in its path. My guess, and believe me, it's nothing more than a guess, is that our friend here is something more than he or she appears, and might actually play a role in the initial flay of crimson that sparks Ganon to life, thrashing out to take the opportunity he has awaited for so long. And that Link and Zelda, well, they've been led to this place deliberately for this purpose. A real stretch could even be to say that this rat is a minion or a follower, similar to Girahim or Astor, intent on reviving their master, only to pay the price for their allegiance soon after, as they too are consumed by the malice that now pours freely from Ganon's wounds. Back to the other pieces in this mystery, we have a few other facts that would also support where we're heading. Link is a right-hander, and shown to be without the Master Sword following these events, instead appearing to sport a new bracelet of sorts that harnesses a green energy, and let's call it a spirit energy, which Link uses to exact his new set of powers, almost appearing to combine with the Triforce-like yellow blast from his right hand. Link is able to reverse the flow of objects in time, almost reminiscent of a mixture between the stasis effect of the first game combined with the time shift stones that acted as a core mechanic in Skyward Sword. The point here is that based from what we see of this version of Link, generalized as the version wearing the blue tunic, his right arm is more focused on wielding powers or magic than a variety of weapons. Even more curiously, the fight in the cave seems to show Link using his left arm as an offensive tool, driven by the shield Zonai type fire wielding attachment that also appears to harness this green energy to produce its attack. In both appendages, it could be argued that this version of Link is not typical to the one we played with in Breath of the Wild, but rather his arms are supported by equipment, jewelry, and modifications of sorts that allow him to defend and attack, albeit in a very different way than we've seen in the past. It's not to say that he won't be wielding weapons at all. We know from the copywritten game mechanics observed in January that a bow-based shooting mechanic will be a central aspect of gameplay, along with skydiving and island traversal. Oddly though, these shots generally seem to feature the more crudely dressed version of Link, what we'd align to be the ancient hero we see in the tapestry, more so than the blue tunic badass we've come to know in the first game. And while we're talking about that tapestry, am I the only one who thinks the ancient hero depicted here seems to have a black eye tucked under those flowing red locks? It's readily agreed that the arm appears to show a striking resemblance to the arm we see in the trailer with its full power green glory, but the eye is noticeably black, and in stark contrast to the eyes of Princess Zelda, who sports the expected white surrounds of a normal looking eye in the very same tapestry. Could this be an omen of sorts, foreboding the fate of the hero as he is drained of blood to resurrect Ganon, left to deteriorate further until a final showdown where indeed the last vestige of this true hero leaves him? A tragic end to a hero who fights to save others even despite the loss of his essence, and knowing full well that his fate shall indeed be entwined with that of the monster Ganon. One thing that has come up repeatedly in Zelda discussions is the concept of the Curse of Demise. This notion came to the fore following Skyward Sword, where the storyline of the game establishes the origins of the lore now so familiar to most players. Placing itself firmly at the start of the newly formed timeline of Zelda games, tropes of the Triforce, the hero, and the princess were grounded in an age-old battle of good versus evil, where Goddess Hylia fought the King of Evil, a creature named simply Demise, and his monster horde who sought to rule Hyrule and gain the powers of the Triforce. The struggle culminated in a plan by Hylia to reincarnate as a human, Princess Zelda in fact, who would then leverage the courage of a chosen hero and the Triforce to finally defeat evil and bring peace to the land of Hyrule. The plot is fantastic, don't get me wrong. I'm certainly skipping the details that make it essential for any hardcore fan, but to cut to the chase, it ends with our hero Link striking down Demise in a medieval rendition of Thunderstruck that AC/DC would be proud of. But Demise, like classic villains of cinema and television, would not bow out without one last grandstanding monologue and evil demented laugh. Demise outlines a curse that he will bestow on the hero and the princess, that they will be entwined in an endless cycle of hatred as his malice is reborn to wreak vengeance again and again, forever through time. Sounds pretty serious, but is it a curse? Really? Is this the cause of an endless cycle that's created countless troubles for a trio of individuals representing the core tenets of the Triforce, that being courage, wisdom, and power? Or, bear with me here, was Demise simply stating the bleeding obvious? That where there's good, there's bad. That where something will go up, it will come down, and that in life, we always seem to find a balance being struck between opposing forces. Simply, we know that if the Triforce exists, it will bring temptation, corrupt those weak of heart who desire power, or more plainly, that there can be no peace without war. Regardless of the truth, the fact is, from this origin story, we know a few key facts. Not only does the King of Evil meet his demise, eventually so does the hero and the princess. Now, if you're a little perplexed at this point, I hear. I didn't see them die in the game, you might be thinking, and you'd be 100% correct, but believe me, they did pass, eventually. And we know this for certain as the protagonist of each adventure thereon features a new incarnation of the hero, the princess, and the villain, a few games excluded, of course. It's heavily implied that Ganondorf is the direct incarnation of Demise, down to his evil intent, monster affiliation, red hair, and penchant for trying to overthrow the kingdom and obtain the Triforce for his own nefarious means. But Ganondorf too dies, a few times actually, and is reincarnated down the line to once again provide the necessary foil to the powers of good. Now, before you switch off completely wondering why we're stating the obvious, the point to address here is the fact that the hero does die. We just don't always see it played out in a story scenario. In fact, the Fallen timeline owes part of its maligned controversy to basing its premise on this very concept, something that makes us inherently uncomfortable as fans of the series, knowing that in some way Link, and therefore us as the player, have somehow failed and fallen in battle to rid evil. Hyrule Historia all but confirms that the hero Shade, our mentor and wolf buddy from Twilight Princess, is indeed the relic of the hero of time, his life now faded as he seeks to pass on his knowledge as a final gift to the land he has protected since a mere boy playing in the woods. In the brief discussions IG Enuma has detailed about the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the tone and theme of the game being darker than its predecessor has proven a tantalizing nugget for those speculating on just what might play out in Breath of the Wild 2. The game's tone has been compared in ways to that of Majora's Mask, a game that, similar to this one, followed the same hero as the game prior, reused assets and game engines that set out to tell a much richer story in a world that immersed us in a most unsettling manner that can best be described as uncomfortable for most. A game where many consider the themes to be much more mature, almost indicative of the 7 stages of grief, dealing with loss and tragedy, impending doom and hopelessness, and even typified by pressure, urgency, and all-round weirdness. Is it unreasonable to think that where Majora's Mask could be interpreted as the emotional management of loss and grieving, that the sequel we await could broach this topic in a far more direct manner? To add more weight to this argument, let's also consider that Link, our hero, is a being lost to time in the way he was kept dormant for over 100 years in the Resurrection Chamber, healing from certain death to have another shot at saving Hyrule. It could be argued that Link is on borrowed time already, and that maybe a century-long nap may have consequences down the line. Breath of the Wild presented an almost post-apocalyptic Hyrule, where the remaining settlements tried to rebuild from a devastating attack, all the while surrounded by ever-increasing monster hordes, giant laser-shooting killer robots, and an alarming demonic pig-dragon beast swirling over the horizon, and of course, a randomly spawning blood moon that brought any evil forces once defeated back from the grave. Throughout your travels, you come across destroyed ruins, echoing the tales of the people who once lived here. Enormous bones protrude from the landscape, hearkening to beasts more grand than any currently living, from a time long forgotten. And even the carcasses of 3 Leviathan, truly phenomenal beings in their own right, form a side quest regarding their extinction, yet another reminder of death and loss that litter the world from coast to compass end. Yet amongst this pervading death is the visage of life renewed, the silent princess, which adorns the logo and symbolically features in the scattered narrative to serve as a reminder of hope, rebirth, and triumph in the face of adversity. A mimic to the spirit of the princess herself, this flower, which could not be saved with human intervention, has managed to thrive in the unforgiving wilds of Hyrule, dancing in the breeze that blows the fresh grass swaying in the fields of villages from Hateno to Lurelin. The wilds seem to bloom with fresh life, and children, born in a time where the calamity is a near-fading memory for those who bring the future. They promise a world worth fighting for, an innocence worth defending, and a future more precious than the times now lost. The world of Breath of the Wild represents a living and organic cycle, as life ends and begins in the same breath as it gently caresses the ruins of the past, carrying with it the seeds of the future. This theme is even more evident in the actions of the characters themselves. We see our Princess Zelda and Link defying time, refusing to yield in its wake as they carry the burden of the world around them. It shows in the Sheikah, Pura, who bounces with the energy of youth, stemming from her experiments in reversing the aging process, acting as a straight dichotomy to Impa and Robbie, both of whom have significantly aged and yet remain spurred on their task to aid the hero and save Hyrule. In their wisdom, they have also needed support, unable to fetch the flame they once easily gathered for the furnace, or to tend to their own home, requiring the assistance of family to clean and help things go along. Yet they remain revered as they approach the end of their time, owing somewhat to the job now finished, as the hero sets off to face the calamity and save not only Hyrule, but the princess who has waged a private war for nearly a century with malice itself. Even the champions and their tales speak of loss and purpose, duty and fulfillment. Their gratitude shared with the very essence they give the hero as thanks for redeeming the divine beast and once and for all seeking to defeat the calamity they too had set out to conquer all those many years ago. Their stories form the purpose of your adventures, and you come face to face with the consequences their losses wrought on the people who love them so. None represent this aspect more than Mipha, whose loss is almost palpable in the kingdom of the Zora, weighing on the king and his people, and a brother who seeks to carry his tribe into the future with hope. It's a lesson in death and loss, but also of hope and rebirth, like a reincarnation. Yes, the champion's tale is a sad one, heartbreaking to learn as you talk to the people it touched, but you also engage with the future, the new generation of champions who fight for a future inspired by the very same who came before them, admiring them as legends in their own tribes. The likes of Prince Sudon, Yunobo, Princess Ruta and Tiba serve to remind us that where there is loss there is also renewal, and with this renewal comes the spirit of those who pass the torch. It's a lesson in what you do with your time and the legacy you leave behind, as something that matters to a great many who will carry your spirit forward. If Link is dying, I think the message is not that hope is lost. It might be that Link and Zelda's spirit and indeed that of the people of this great land, helped them fulfill a greater destiny than one we knew of in Breath of the Wild. Reflecting on that game, it occurred to me that you really didn't lose anyone. They were already gone. You learned of these people, these places, and as you and Link recovered memories of time forgotten, all the while you were driven to achieve the main goal of saving Hyrule, and more personally Princess Zelda. The captured memories played out a growth in their characters and relationship, from duty to respect, caring, and finally, dare I say it, love. If the sequel is to be darker, the loss that would sting harder than any would be the loss of the relationship between a hero and a princess we have grown up with. They finally seem destined to have a future of happiness that might allow them to step outside the roles and duties they were bound to, and into a future where they might experience true freedom. But with Ganon looking to be resurrected in the sequel, maybe Demise's curse is a real concept in this epic saga of legend. Ill-fated to be devastated by evil's reincarnation. Could Link and Zelda truly be bound to a fate of hardship, where freedom will always lie simply out of reach? I guess we'll find out when the sequel arrives, in what we can only hope will be the later part of this year. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you've made it this far, really, I'd like to say thank you. It's heartfelt, and I appreciate you spending your valuable time with us. Like all theories though, nothing is certain until proven. But there's more to come in this series of what ifs that I'll continue to piece together to provide likely scenarios of what we might have in store for us with the sequel. And I can't wait to cover off on some of the more interesting finds I know are unique, uncovered, and definitely worth you taking a look into. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with any of the points raised today. You can have a different opinion and that'd be great. Either way, I'd be keen to see your input, as the best part of the passion for The Legend of Zelda and its many mysteries, the unbelievable creativity of fans who helped to bring this material to life with their passion, viewpoints, and willingness to delve back into a world that continues to draw us in over and over again. Thanks again. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time here on GameSmiths.
I can no longer hear the voice inside the sword. I suppose it would make sense if my power had dwindled over the past 100 years. I'm surprised to admit it, but I can accept that.
What is darkness? The absence of light from our visage, or the culmination of shadows grown so invasive over our hearts and minds that nothing else exists but the blackness? Darkness can take on many shapes and forms, from a visual hue to a physical manifestation of our deepest fears. Darkness can be typified by a sense of dread and hopelessness, a place we dare not tread too long, lest we be lost in the abyss of torment. In The Legend of Zelda, darkness is personified by the Dark Realm, a demon world of sorts, where creatures of pure evil are born, including the being, known in lore most commonly as Dark Link. Also referred to as Shadow Link, this enigma has appeared randomly throughout the series, acting as a challenge to rival the hero and sporting the same moveset and skills. In every way, he is you, and you are him, leading to the cry, "Conquer yourself." With the sequel to Breath of the Wild set to be darker in tone, and similarities being made to Majora's Mask, it's only fitting we should wonder, what if Dark Link returns? To earn your interest and valuable time, I wanted to present some findings that I found while researching this concept. As always, your thoughts on the items presented might differ from mine. That's perfectly okay. But if you find them interesting and worthy of your thoughts and time, then I'd ask you to watch the rest of the video, where the theory is further fleshed out. It is a theory and elements of speculations abound, but there's more to this mystery we can find hidden in plain sight. Firstly, let's start with what I thought was a very strange observation. In researching the theory in early days, I went to the books on hand to read up on Dark Link and Shadow Link. I noticed a more overarching connection to the first Legend of Zelda titles that really caught my interest, and the character of Dark Link was a pronounced player in the leading events. Referring also to the references in Breath of the Wild, I consulted Creating a Champion, otherwise known as Masterworks in Japan, to verify what I knew about the Dark Link outfit you get in the game. This is where things started to get a little odd. You see, the Dark Link outfit is not referenced in Creating a Champion at all, not under the armor and clothing section, nor under monsters, or anywhere you might expect it to be. This might seem like a chance omission, but when you consider that literally every other outfit, other than the Switch shirt and the Ravager in-game crossover with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 are present, including those found in the DLC packs, it begs a greater question. Why is this outfit not in a tome that covers nearly every aspect of the game? And if I sound paranoid, fair call, but I should warn you, it's not going to get better from here. The intrigue surrounding the Dark Link outfit only increases the more you look. The clothing can only be obtained from one place in the game, and that's being purchased from Kilton upon completion of the 4 Divine Beasts, and at a hefty price of close to 4,000 mon, the most expensive items by far. For those not sure what mon is, this is a currency specific only to Kilton and represents monster money, the cash earned by trading monster parts with this colourful, if not a little creepy character. Kilton is a dealer in all things monster related, even selling monster essence, which, combined with the right ingredients, can even help produce monster cake, a critical item for one of the side quests found in the game. Referring back however to the Dark Link outfit, the descriptions that go with specific pieces of the ensemble explain that they are made based on the image of a monster born of darkness. The items include the Dark Hood, Dark Tunic and Dark Trousers, all of which cannot be upgraded by the Great Fairies, nor recoloured at the Kochi Dye Shop. The entire outfit is tailored to match the garb worn by the Hero of Time, a callback to the first chronological encounter Link has with his dark nemesis in Ocarina. Regardless of the incarnations and appearances since, it seems fitting, if not a little strange, that Dark Link would marry his outfit to the version of Link from the game at the beginning of the timeline split, and where this creature is first encountered. It gets even stranger if we go by the description, which states the clothing is made by Kilton himself, which begs a reasonable question to ask how he could possibly know the attire of the Hero of Time. Surely he did not come up with the exact replica by pure chance, so we can only deduce that there is more to this outfit than Kilton is letting on. When Link dons the Dark Link outfit, he shares the dark red glowing eyes we see in that surreal cutscene from Twilight Princess, referencing the powerful ancient dark tribe that were banished to the Twilight Realm when the kingdom came under threat. The outfit elicits responses of fear and dread from other characters in-game. Dare it be said, almost the same reaction most people get when they watch this disturbing cutscene. It's as if the outfit itself is imbued with the same darkness it was born from, exuding a sinister terror on the NPCs who cower in its presence. The cost of the dark tunic itself is 999 mon, an odd amount, until you hold this up to a mirror and see the reflection equates to 666. A little disconcerting. Going further with the theme at hand, I realised as well that the term dark features frequently when referencing characters and events in the game. The final stage of the boss fight with Ganon is actually referred to as Dark Beast Ganon. The luminous outfit, glowing with Stalfos-like features, is a reflection of the luminous stones which glow in the dark, a curious reference highlighted in the initial teaser trailer for the sequel. Other references range from the Phantom Ganon armor set, rumoured to be possessed by a dark entity, to the staple Master Sword, referred to as the sword that seals the darkness. The Sheikah is said to operate in the dark corners of history, and even the history of Hyrule speaks of an endless cycle of darkness and light where Ganon is revived then sealed away. The revival of Calamity Ganon is marked by dark clouds gathering, where the champions fought valiantly, yet none were able to stand against the dark manifestations of Ganon. Even Zelda's speech for the ancient ceremonial blessing states, "You have shown unflinching bravery and skill in the face of darkness and adversity." In fairness to the observations made, they may not all be the correct translations from the original Japanese text in Masterworks. I'm certainly no expert, and I suspect someone out there will be able to quickly dispel the references as an oversimplification from Dark Horse in translating the material to English. One could argue that the frequency of the term can be explained in the juxtaposition of light to dark, often used in literature to represent opposing forces, and a crucial theme that underpins the series to date. Still, it left me curious and I wondered if I'd be the only one. So let's switch gears, and I'll finish this section off with another curiosity I discovered, or should I say, didn't discover. In your many travels of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, have you come across an object you can clearly identify as a mirror? It's an odd question. I've explored around the villages, and the closest I can come across is something like this object in Pyre's room, although if it is a mirror, it's covered over, making it impossible to verify. Smaller versions could be found in a house or two in Hateno, but for the whole, mirrors appear to be almost completely absent in this massive world. And if you're wondering why this has any relevance to Dark Link, then let me assure you, I'll explain. See, the findings above have one thread in common. They're all hidden in plain sight, and could be considered at best an odd coincidence, or at worst, almost disconcerting. They're curious when you consider them, each on their own, and for me anyway, downright interesting when you start to view them collectively. We all face hardship, and if you've tackled feelings of loneliness, anxiety, and fear, you might share a similar view when it comes to defining darkness. See, my experience with true darkness is like describing an entity that looms out of sight, but always peripheral, hovering like a spectre in the recesses of your senses, until it sheds its disguise and greets you wholesale. Before you know it, darkness is upon you with all its magnificent shade and bewilderment, commanding your senses and attention in a confrontation of your inner demons and truths. The clues are there, but all too often we only put them together when the reckoning comes to our front door. Everything is a coincidence until it's not, and every signal irrelevant until it's crucial. There's every chance the observations covered here are a novelty at best, coincidental and explainable, the musings of a curious mind. But what if they're not? Before we begin, I want to set the scene for the rest of the video that I consider Dark Link and Shadow Link to be one and the same. There are plenty of videos out there that cover the topic in general, much better than I can, and the references from Japanese to English that lead most to believe that, for all intensive purposes, Dark Link and Shadow Link are the same entity. As it's not the focus of this video, I wanted to cover it off and just move on. The first appearance of Dark Link in-game can be traced all the way back to the Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. In this outing, Dark Link serves the role of the final boss challenge at the end of the game. Chronologically speaking though, and with reference to the heavily debated timeline, Dark Link makes his debut in Ocarina. As the player traverses the many wonders and challenges of the Water Temple, they stumble across an area that is mystical, and so out of place that it commands attention and a sense of awe. The scene is unworldly in a way, an open area, brightly lit, with a soft layer of water gracing the floor, acting as a mirror to the world above it. Between the entrance and exit of this space sits a lone, dead tree, a distinct character of solitude in this illusionary void. Symbolism in this space is bold and direct. The water is a powerful medium in Japanese Shintoism, where the worshipping of kami, otherwise known as Japanese deities or spirits, begins with an act of purification by water. Water is cleansing, providing renewal and removing corruptions through fluid, formless simplicity. It is also the source of life. Not only are we reliant on hydration for basic function, but it also acts as a source of food, transport, trade, and connection. The meaning of water is as varied as its applications in our lives. The other striking symbol in the room is the dead tree. Most are familiar with the tree of life, but a dead tree is almost the juxtaposition of the same, representing death. So it is more than interesting that when the player passes this tree, their reflection disappears, no longer visible in the mirrored surface of the water below. Like a part of Link has somehow just died, and he, like the tree, is now all alone in this dimension, where even his shadow and reflection have left him to go alone. When you experience this for the first time, I dare say most people aren't acutely aware of what is happening. They likely don't sit to ponder the intricate pieces as we've done here, but more so notice that the area is odd. Now past this tree, something has changed, maybe a feeling of caution starts to kick in as you realise not all is as it seems. This change in atmosphere belies the calming nature of the scene, and soon enough the player's fears are realised when they gaze back on the tree to find their reflection, Dark Link, staring back at them in pure defiance. Navi, your fairy guide throughout the game, provides the most succinct and apt advice she espouses throughout the entire game. Conquer yourself. The battle is an ebb and flow, depending on the actions of the player, with Dark Link responding in kind to your movement and level of aggression. Victory here sees a guttural scream from Dark Link as he falls through the floor, and the visages of water and tree disappear like a mirage, revealing the space to be nothing but an ordinary room, bookmarked by Link's shadow returning to his figure. As Ocarina of Time ends, the timeline splits into 3 unique outcomes. Where Link wins against Ganon, we have the child timeline, where he's sent back to live out his youth by Zelda, and the adult timeline, where the events proceed without the Hero of Time due to him being sent back to the child timeline. And finally, most controversially, we have the Fallen timeline, an alternate reality where the Hero of Time loses to Ganon in the final battle, leaving Zelda and the sages to seal Ganon in the Sacred Realm with the Triforce in order to protect the land of Hyrule. Following this timeline, the next game chronologically is A Link to the Past. In this adventure, it is explained that Ganon, locked away in the Sacred Realm with the Triforce, turns this land into the Dark World, a place of demons and monsters. In Hyrule though, word of the Triforce and immense power promised lures fortune hunters to cross realms where they soon find themselves turned into monster form and recruited to Ganon's ever-growing Legion of Evil. With his power ever-growing, Ganon seeks revival into the light world of Hyrule, and a new hero must save both Zelda and Hyrule once more. As other legends come and go, it's next in the Oracle games that Ganon's mentor, Twin Rover, calls out of this dark realm the Sorceress of Shadow, Viren, who summons 4 Darklings to join her in the final battle. Again, our hero must overcome the villain, as well as the dark versions of himself, in order to save Hyrule. Interestingly enough, in these games, Twin Rover attempts to resurrect Ganon by sacrificing Zelda. When she is unsuccessful, Twin Rover sacrifices herself. Now, she lacks the blood of the goddess, and the subsequent resurrection does not go according to plan, and results in a beast-like creature replacing the once intelligent King of Thieves. From this point, he is known simply as Beast Ganon, creature of malice, bent on destruction, and without reasoning. Starting to sound a little familiar. Dark Link appears in Four Swords Adventures, promoted in Ganon's army and now leading the forces of evil in servitude of their master. A reference in game provides some interesting context, particularly when viewed in light of other details we know within the lore. It states, long ago a dark tribe invaded Hyrule. They were defeated and imprisoned within the mirror, Shadow Link. Could he be your evil reflection, cast by the dark mirror? If that were the motive of the mirror's thief, this is disastrous. If we don't get the mirror back, Hyrule will be overrun with evil Shadow Links. Here we have references to a dark tribe sealed into a mirror world following an invasion of Hyrule. Breaking this down, we know the Dark World was created by Ganon from the Sacred Realm when he was sealed with the Triforce in A Link to the Past. This realm was able to be accessed by Link in that game via a magic mirror, the same tool implied in the events of Four Sword Adventures. Furthermore, the whole description sounds eerily familiar to the events of Twilight Princess, where we find out about the Twilight, who were also considered a powerful magic-wielding tribe, sealed into a mirror-like dimension after a failed invasion of Hyrule. Ganon himself was sealed in the Twilight Realm by the sages following his failed execution at the Arbiter's grounds and subsequent murder of the Water Sage. About now you might be thinking to yourself that some of these themes are repeating, and you'd be right. There are variations to each and intricacies worthy of acknowledging, but the same motifs of Dark World, Mirror Traversal, an ancient Dark Tribe, and Ganon all seem to recur. The origins of Dark Link are heavily debated, although the appearances seem to err more towards the entity being something born of the darkness, recruited into Ganon's horde with his allegiance earned by his freedom from the Dark World. More than that, Dark Link appears to gain more importance in Ganon's endeavours, playing a more defining role in his master's plans and more influence in the legends of times past. All of this leads us to the final entry of the Fallen timeline, The Legend of Zelda 2 Link's Adventure, where Dark Link serves as the final boss in Link's campaign. But even this appearance brings about some debate. To understand the confusion and importance to this theory, it's crucial to understand the story of Link's adventure, and why it might be more integral to the events of Breath of the Wild 2 than many have considered. Around the launch of Breath of the Wild, Nintendo broke with tradition and presented at GDC with a detailed exploration of their process in development of the new Zelda title. The presentation centered around the driving philosophy, breaking conventions, a mantra to challenge the staid tropes of Zelda that had defined the franchise, while simultaneously obscuring its relevance in the modern era of gaming. If A Link to the Past had established the fundamentals, Ocarina of Time had refined the formula to perfection, setting the blueprint for 3D action-adventure titles to follow, and a narrative still widely considered best in class today. Decades later though, Nintendo found themselves unable to outdo the heights achieved back in Ocarina of Time, and the Zelda franchise, while still adored by loyalists, was struggling to define its place in the future landscape. The team recognised the dilemma, and that only through challenging the conventions of what made a Zelda game could they truly chart a new course and reinvigorate their flagship title, and it all began with looking back to the first Zelda game. See, way back in the late 1980s, Shigeru Miyamoto was in the process of revolutionising the video game market, bringing it back to life following the collapse of the post-Atari era. Following on from successes with Donkey Kong and Super Mario Bros., Miyamoto longed to tap into the experience he had as a child exploring caves with a simple lantern. The event had stuck with him, and he thought it would translate to children around the world who also sought adventure. This developed into the first Legend of Zelda. The game was unlike anything out at the time, and amongst its firsts for gaming included the ability to save your progress. Taking on the character of Link, players could set out into the open wilds to explore, find dungeons, secrets. Before they knew it, they were swept up on a quest to save Princess Zelda from a villain named Ganon. The team presenting at GDC recognised that in the first Zelda game, linearity did not exist. Players were not directed to do anything. If they so wished and were skilled enough, they could take on the hardest challenges in the game. And so in developing Breath of the Wild, they wanted to provide this sense of freedom back to the player. You can head direct to the castle to do battle with the Calamity if you so wish. The only requirement was the completion of the introductory plateau area and 4 shrine challenges, designed to introduce the Sheikah Slate mechanic, rudimentary tools like magnesis, bombs, stasis, and cryonis, as well as the all-important sailcloth for traversal. Combined, you were now set with an arsenal of abilities to explore the wilds and progress through the game. Controversially, the player did not need to defeat a set number of dungeons or even collect the Master Sword to beat the final boss. No, this was an old-school Zelda with a new look, and the gamble resulted in arguably the best game of all time. Even an early dev kit of the game was one built in the traditional 2D style of the first Legend of Zelda, and allowed the team to explore the mechanics and environmental interaction of the chemical and physics engines that would inspire hours of interaction from curious gamers to see what they could do. The inspiration of the first Zelda game are quite clear on Breath of the Wild, and other elements covered in the presentation also raise a few eyebrows when we look at what we now know of the sequel. There's concept art featuring Link with the mechanical arm of sorts, which is used to activate powers or tools similar to that of the Sheikah Slate. Yet another shows an intelligent looking Ganondorf amidst a skybound island housing a castle, a notion most will be all too familiar with following the E3 trailer from 2021. Going through more of these, there are other images which have a good chance of being included in the sequel. One specifically shows the return of the Minish, with smaller inhabitants being an idea the team really wanted to include, but was put aside as the game mired longer in development. Yet another shows the interior of a dungeon shrine type area, although arguably unique to the shrine quests from the first game. The artwork reveals a lighter coloration and sleeker aesthetic, possibly related to a different dungeon type perhaps, yet to be revealed in the sequel. But the open freedom of player engagement was not the only way the first Zelda title inspired the team. Hyrule Historia describes the Fallen timeline as follows. Of all possible outcomes, Link, the hero of time, faced defeat at the hands of Ganondorf. The thief obtained the 3 pieces of the Triforce, transformed into the Demon King Ganon, and continued to threaten the world in future eras. The conflict surrounding the Triforce continued without end. The blood of the gods weakened, and the kingdom of Hyrule shrank to a shadow of its former glory. To be clear, I'm not heading down a timeline theory path here, nor am I saying that Breath of the Wild sits in the fallen timeline. What I am pointing out though is that the environment of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild sounds eerily similar to that described in the first and second Legend of Zelda titles. In reference to the first game, Hyrule is considered a kingdom in decline. More specifically, it states, "No one appeared who was able to wield the Triforce, and Hyrule divided again and again, continuing to shrink. The proud kingdom of Hyrule had once covered a vast area of land, but the passage of the ages saw its decline, and eventually shrank into a single small kingdom. Though the Triforce of Wisdom continued to be handed down from generation to generation, as the long years passed, the existence of the Triforce of Courage and the tragedy of Princess Zelda I were also lost to memory." The booklet describes the inhabitants as being surrounded by harsh and abundant nature, a description that's very akin to that seen in Breath of the Wild. Heck, even this picture of Ganon's dungeon entrance from The Legend of Zelda looks like a cartoonish interpretation of the adorned cave entrance we see in the first trailer. Summing up, we have a kingdom in decline, a wild abundance of nature, relics of the past littering the landscape, and a princess who shows a tenuous connection to the powers of the goddess graced to her lineage, waning over the ages as the stories of the past become the era of myth and legend. So moving into the sequel, I started looking into The Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link to see if the story might present any clues. And what I found was interesting to say the least. You see, whilst Link defeats Ganon in his beast form in the first Legend of Zelda, the sequel describes the land where Ganon's horde continue to wreak havoc in an attempt to resurrect their master. This involves a ceremony with a blood sacrifice of sorts, which was the inspiration for the last video I made, What If Link is Dying? The story is detailed as follows. It explains one great king of Hyrule who had put the Triforce's power to use was concerned that its might would be abused after his death. In order to prevent this, he hid the Triforce of Courage, placing a spell over the land of Hyrule. The monarch's magic ensured that a crest would appear upon a worthy person who had been properly raised once they had reached a certain age and gained enough experience. Though the prince and young princess were already heirs to the throne, the king of Hyrule had his doubts about the worth and character of his son. Seeing more promise in Princess Zelda, he passed on the Triforce to her in secret. Following the king's death and with no crest appearing upon the hand of the prince, the power of the Triforce he had inherited as the new king was incomplete. This new king was advised by his closest confidant, a wizard, that Princess Zelda seemed to know what was behind these events, and despite being interrogated by the wizard and her brother the king, Princess Zelda confessed nothing. The wizard lost his temper and threatened to use magic to cast a spell that would cause the princess to sleep for all eternity, but she stubbornly refused to talk. Once the wizard had finished casting his spell, Princess Zelda crumpled where she stood. Mad with grief and regretting what he had done, the young king placed his sleeping sister Princess Zelda on an altar in the North Castle, in the hopes that she would someday be revived. To ensure this tragedy would never be forgotten, custom was established that decreed that every girl born into Hyrule's royal family would be given the name of Zelda. So now aware of the tragedy of Zelda I and the meaning of the symbol on his hand, Impa provides Link with a scroll left by the king, written in ancient Hylian that no one can decipher, except the bearer of the mark. Link is able to read the scroll, which details the location of the Triforce of Courage, and also explains that the Chosen must journey to 6 palaces and defeat their guardian deities to bring down the barrier on the final location and gain access to the Triforce. Leading into the sequel to Breath of the Wild, many have wondered how the place of the divine beasts and dungeons might come about, as well as wondering the role of the Triforce, which was almost incidental in the first game. Whilst I don't see Nintendo going from this storyline directly, I do think it serves as a perfect inspiration for what we might see in the sequel, whilst also answering some of the main questions we have. Palaces provide the perfect basis for dungeons in the sequel. They are clearly hidden, as implied by the tale, and the number aligns perfectly with the 6 sages prevalent throughout Zelda lore, with the addition of the final 7th palace representing Zelda, the 7th sage. The guardian deities are not simply a throwback to the guardians of Breath of the Wild, but I dare say this frog-like creature encountered in the trailer is a prime example of what one of them would be. Many have speculated that this creature does not appear to be evil, but more so a troll of sorts, which would fit the narrative of the storyline perfectly. Moreover, he's powered by a green type energy, which many have linked to the hand-sealing Ganon. This could also be interpreted to match the colour of courage and Furore, the deity of courage. If the Triforce was sealed in the palace, now floating above Hyrule and Ganon's grasp, it would seem fitting that defeating all 6 palaces and guardians would allow the player to then enter the final palace, face the challenges within, and finally grasp the Triforce of Courage to help defeat Ganon once and for all. According to the Adventure of Link, the final guardian to be faced is the Thunderbird. Now, tell me if a battle against a giant guardian deity like the Thunderbird reimagined in the world of Breath of the Wild does not sound epic. I also think this could be an apt use of the mechanic recently patented by Nintendo for Link, using his bow whilst falling and diving at various degrees. Maybe the final battle will be the Thunderbird and could be across skies, falling to islands and traversing up and down to best the opponent. I don't know about you, but it just sounds awesome to me. But the game didn't end there. After the Thunderbird was vanquished, players are greeted with the final test against their shadow, Dark Link. Little explanation, the player must confront the dark incarnation of themselves in a showdown of skill and endurance. The fight in gaming standards is notoriously hard, and a retake on this enemy for Breath of the Wild 2 could be just the remedy for those who thought Calamity Ganon was way too easy. Coming back to the question earlier about the mirror, did you manage to find one? I'm not including the item many think is the Mirror of Twilight near Lurelin, in case you're wondering. Creating a champion shows one of the only specific examples I could find, and its location is Princess Zelda's room. It states simply, full-length mirror, 30, so there is no reflection. I thought that was an oddly specific thing to note. Intrigued, I had to investigate this further to see for myself. And upon inspection of the room, the remnants of what appears to be the full-length mirror featured in the corner. This is in addition to a dresser, which could be argued to have a mirror fold out near the wardrobe. On both occasions though, they are notably deteriorated and non-reflective. So the only place in the game I can find evidence of a mirror was in Princess Zelda's room. I thought that would be the end of the thread, but I was wrong. See, whilst I was there, I decided to reread the diary. I was taken aback when I read the second last entry again. It says, I had a dream last night. In a place consumed by darkness, a lone woman gazed at me, haloed by blinding light. I sensed she was not of this world. I don't know if she was a fairy or a goddess, but she was beautiful. Her lips spoke urgently, but her voice did not reach me. Would I have heard her if my power was awoken? Or was my dream simply a manifestation of my fears? I am sure I will know the answers soon, whether I wish to or not. Zelda goes on with her final entry, reflecting on the dream, which filled her with a strange and terrible certainty that something awful was about to happen. Factually speaking, we know this incarnation of Zelda has struggled with realizing her sealing powers. Experiences a dream in a place consumed by darkness where she receives somewhat of an omen from a being she describes as not of this world, precursor to the calamity. This event would happen in her room, the only place I can find evidence of a mirror in all of Hyrule. Another connection to themes of darkness, beings of another realm, and mirrors. Many Zelda theorists have made a strong connection between the events in Zelda games and the ancient Japanese religion, Shintoism. The connections are there and confirmed by developers, with more recent examples being the Tori seen in the sequel trailer, with Tori acting as gates between the mundane and the spiritual realm of the kami, deities and spirits. But another very important symbol to Shintoism is the mirror. Mirrors are considered to be items of immense power, culturally speaking. In fact, the 3 sacred items transferred to the Emperor of Japan is a sword, a gem, and a mirror. See, according to Japanese mythology, a mirror and a jewel were used to lure the sun goddess Amaterasu Omakami from the cave where she had withdrawn, which had plunged the world into darkness. As such, the Emperor receives the 3 sacred treasures to seal his ascension to the throne: the regalia, a sword, a jewel, and a mirror, all of which symbolize legitimacy. They are so crucial in fact that the Emperor Hirohito is said to have stated that protecting them was a factor in his decision to surrender in World War II. Bringing this back to the topic at hand though, does it then seem odd that this simple household item, present in homes and game worlds and intrinsically integral to the culture and religion which act as the core inspiration for Breath of the Wild, is absent in its entirety from the game? Where it could make some sense, I guess, is if we have a situation where a certain ancient tribe of powerful magic wielders was banished, in a similar vein to that of the Twilight, and that the Mirror, now synonymous with the Dark Realm, is also shunned, ensuring this tribe remained forever isolated from the land of Hyrule. It's a crazy thought, I know, yet if the plan was to reintroduce Dark Link into the storyline for Breath of the Wild, the points raised in this video about the connections between the Dark World, an ancient evil tribe banished from the kingdom, and mirrors starts to actually make a whole heap of sense. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you've made it this far, you have my gratitude and heartfelt thanks. I appreciate there's a lot of speculation being thrown about here, but I hope you'd agree the evidence and supporting details go a fair way into making this what if a consideration when it comes to how things might play out in the sequel. At the very least, I hope the points raised here continue to inspire the many fans of the series to consider alternatives, and keep adding to the mysteries and lore that make The Legend of Zelda such a rich tapestry of wonder, imagination, and intrigue. Plenty more what ifs to come, and I look forward to sharing those with you. Thanks for being patient in between videos as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and a massive thanks to those who responded positively to the last video and took the time to share their awesome thoughts and ideas. It was really inspiring and truly humbling, so thank you so much. Thanks for being amazing. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time here on GameSmiths.
If I may be so bold, what is it that you are planning to do next, Princess?
The Master Sword. I heard it speak to me. It seems that my role is unfinished. There is still something I must do.
I sense there is great strength in your dedication.
Great Deku Tree, I ask of you, when he returns, can you please relay this message? Tell him
Now then, words intended for him would sound much better in the tones of your voice, don't you think?
Yes.
What if Zelda is the key? Not in terms of everything we already know, but also the key to one of the biggest mysteries in Breath of the Wild that no one's talking about. The key to everything we don't know about the sequel. Sure doesn't look like it, right? I mean, there she is, falling into a dark abyss. Based off what we do know, I'd be hard pressed to argue with you. But if I was, well, maybe I'd start with a counter question. How do you top the greatest game ever made? If Breath of the Wild was built upon the philosophy of breaking conventions, I'd hazard a guess that the only reasonable way to approach the sequel is to go with a new mantra of sorts, exceeding expectations. But I don't just mean exceeding them, I mean completely flipping the table on whatever the public at large think is coming in spring 2023. As always, it's a theory, nothing more, nothing less, but it's got all the hallmarks of a good mystery, with a foundation of factual information that, in the same vein as past videos, I hope will inspire you to get excited about the series, come up with theories of your own, and break the conventions of what you think is possible when it comes to The Legend of Zelda. So join me as we explore a brand new theory about Zelda, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, and how Nintendo might have us exactly where they planned a long time ago. So how do you top one of the greatest games ever made? Well, to set the scene, it's important to understand the concept of the prestige. It's a term derived in the world of showmanship and illusions that describes the pivotal moment known as the payoff, executed in the third act of any magic trick. First comes the pledge. The magician shows you something relatively ordinary, like a little bird. Second is the turn, where the magician takes the little bird and makes it do something extraordinary, like disappear. And finally, there's the prestige. The magician tops that disappearance and makes the little bird reappear. Execution is key, and when performed with a plume, the observer is taken from the ordinary to the astounding, and it can make you question not only what you saw, but what you inherently believe to be true. Quoting famous master of illusion Ricky Jay, "How can you be certain you saw an illusion?" And therein lies the answer to the question about how Nintendo could counter the expectations of fans around the world. The Zelda team might not have the most consistent track record, but in my humble and personal opinion, I believe that right now, we're amidst masters at the top of their game, and the prestige is already well underway. What makes it even better is that we didn't even know it was happening around us this whole time. Now I know it's a bold statement, and I guarantee not everyone is going to agree on this point, but I'll break down some facts and let you decide. Firstly, Breath of the Wild is widely considered one of the best, if not the best games of all time, and the sequel is amongst the most anticipated titles on the industry radar. Secondly, sales are close to 26 million units standalone, and this excludes sales on the Wii U, and that's also without considering that Breath of the Wild launched the Switch. In other words, it's a console seller. Comparatively, Breath of the Wild is blowing other Zelda titles out of the water, and any news, including the recent announcement of a delay, drives sales. If you don't believe me, well, retail sales of Breath of the Wild increased 51% in the UK, literally following the recent delay announcement for the sequel. It seems that even news about the sequel being delayed is enough to get people wanting more Breath of the Wild. And thirdly, where new footage has been shown, we have in total less than 3 minutes to go by. This includes the trailers from 2019, 2021, and the delay announcement recently by Aonuma. 3 minutes, and I'm being generous. And yet with this small amount of promotion, I couldn't even hope to hazard a guess at how many articles, blogs, videos, fan art, compilations, speculations, and divinations exist now, directly resulting from the briefest of reveals spanning the course of years. And then when a morsel, scrap, or taste comes our way from Nintendo, well, it's hailed by a slew of new reactions and conjectures scrutinized in slow motion and high definition. It's compared to the lore, to previous games, and anything that might garner the smallest of revelations to meet our insatiable hunger. Nintendo as a company has survived changing markets and trends for decades, well before they even entered the video game market. And when they did, they almost single-handedly brought the industry back to life following the infamous crash in the 80s off the back of Atari and the infamous ET saga. Even with the Wii U failing spectacularly, Nintendo executed a pivot following the Wii U up with the Switch, a console that has done the impossible, outselling every other console in their library, including the Wii, and securing a place in the industry where critics believed impossible. But impossible is just a word to Nintendo. And like a great illusionist, we've seen time and time again how this team of amazingly talented people can make the impossible become reality. The prestige is in play, and we're sitting right in the middle, right now. We've surpassed Ordinary almost on pure mileage from the first game, an initial announcement of a sequel. The 2 trailers released to date have us well in the extraordinary zone, and the Big N is working to ratchet things up to fever pitch prior to release, and they have a full arsenal at their disposal. And what I mean by this is that everything from the title to extended gameplay footage, story snippets, character reveals, and everything else in between is going to be mega. If you've ever heard Andy Spiteri on the Champions cast, he does a great visual metaphor of the E3 2021 trailer being like a sample plate in that it was tasty, he's hungry, and he wants the steak, he's ready to eat. You can sincerely hear the anguish in his voice every time he brings it up, and you feel his hunger. So imagine when details start flowing like a buffet of extravagant delights. We'll all be lining up, plates in hand, to fill our bellies with astonishment. If Nintendo gave a title, release date, and even 3 more minutes of brand new footage, it would be a comparative smorgasbord, enough to feed the world, preparing us all as the stage is set for the release of the new game and the moment of the prestige, where extraordinary comes astonishing. How might you ask? Well, great question. It all started on the day of the calamity, 100 years ago. In the myriad of details of the calamity that drove the story in Breath of the Wild, there's a few oddities that I personally feel were overlooked by the majority. I haven't seen anyone else reference it in the way I'm about to share, but I can guarantee I'm not the only one who has wondered about a few of these things, so let's get into it. On the day of the calamity, a crucial detail to note is the location where it all kicks off and the importance of that specific day. You see, it fell on Zelda's 17th birthday, as she met the champions in Lanayru Promenade, following her ascension to Lanayru Mountain and the Spring of Wisdom. Story-wise, the lead-up is covered in Memory 14 to Mount Lanayru, where Zelda tells Link she's travelling to Mount Lanayru to try and awaken her hidden power. According to Creating a Champion, Mount Lanayru is an extraordinarily cold mountain to the south of Zora's domain. This sacred place, named for the goddess of wisdom Nayru, is off limits to anyone under the age of 17, since they lack the prerequisite wisdom to be there. The Spring of Wisdom sits at the top. This is followed by Memory 15, Return of Calamity Ganon, at Lanayru Road and the East Gate. You see, at sunset, Zelda returns from her trek down the mountain where she had spent the day praying to Goddess Hylia at the Spring of Wisdom, clinging to the hope that she might be able to finally unlock her powers. And as she rejoins her companions, she reluctantly shares the news that she felt nothing, and that ultimately her powers still lie dormant. Mipha, in a moment of compassion and encouragement, begins to explain how she channels her healing ability based on a feeling of what we can only determine to be love, as she is unceremoniously cut off by the explosive commencement of the calamity. And as Malice shoots into the skies, the champions arrange to urgently return to their respective divine beasts, where they can assault the calamity now swirling around Zelda's home, the palace, and where King Rome and the King's Guard rally to fight back and enable residents of nearby Castletown to flee for safety. Now, as we all know, best laid plans go awry as the divine beasts are possessed by the blight, creations of the malice now fueling the tremendous beasts they claim as their own before defeating the champions in battle one by one, until all four divine beasts are wrought under Ganon's submission. The thing is, don't you think it's strange that the calamity occurs on that exact day, Zelda's 17th birthday? We know that Calamity Ganon would want to come into the fray with maximum force, but the challenges he faces in reaching his final form whilst battling with Zelda suggest this was not the case. I appreciate he had just spent 100 years or so in an endless battle with the princess, but the spider-like abomination that we eventually face off with as Link is not the full package boss battle we might have hoped for, and the in-game narrative confirms this. Hibernating within a cocoon, it attempted to regenerate a physical form after Link awoke, but was forced to confront him in an incomplete state, according to Hyrule Compendium. Which begs the question, why then? Why that exact moment? Skyward Sword introduces us to the first incarnation of Zelda, reborn from the goddess Hylia as part of her dual-planned approach in besting the source of malice and evil incarnate, Demise. Without going over the entirety of that game, Zelda is guided by a younger version of Impa and seeks out a ritual of prayer at the springs of earth and air. This process is reminiscent of Shinto traditions, designed as a cleansing ritual to rid impurities and connect with the goddess Hylia, which is the key to Zelda fulfilling her greater destiny. I won't spoil anything further, but needless to say, completion of the rituals at each spring could be considered the primary activity in connecting with Hylia. So I then find it odd that Zelda was subjected to the pressure, quote, training for her critical role and unlocking her sealing powers from the age of 7, following the sudden passing of her mother, who appears to be the only individual on the surface of Hyrule capable of showing her this elaborate ritual of going to each of the springs. You would think that King Rome would know this crucial detail, especially considering his wife would have undergone a similar set of expectations and challenges in unlocking her powers. Whilst it can be argued that the same premise as Skyward Sword does not apply to Breath of the Wild, the likeness of the springs and connections to Skyward Sword, even down to the recent trailers for the sequel, would suggest otherwise. We know that Link in Skyward Sword is 17 years old, and it's implied that Zelda is of the same age. And here again in Breath of the Wild, we have Zelda, age 17 to the day, an age pivotal to her acceptance at the Spring of Wisdom, a ritual practice introduced in the origin story and no doubt critical to Breath of the Wild. It was not simply Zelda's love of Link that awoke her Kamehameha wave, but also the completion of her ritual at the Spring of Wisdom that unlocked her potential, and was the subsequent catalyst at Fort Hateno which acted as the trigger. Had the same events happened with Zelda defending Link against an onslaught of Guardians the day prior, and Zelda one spring short of her divine ritual, I fear the results would have been devastating. This isn't the first time age has come into play with the protagonists of the series, impeding their ability to act against evil. Link in Ocarina of Time is immediately sidelined for a 7-year period upon pulling the Master Sword and opening the gate to the Sacred Realm. This unexpected turn of events allowed Ganondorf to lay claim to the Triforce of Power, and ultimately 7 years to devastate Hyrule before meeting any reasonable opposition in the form of Link, Sheik, aka Zelda, and the Sages. A similar point could be argued in Skyward Sword, where the Wing Ceremony and the Ceremony of the Goddess act as events that not only mark the transition to the next stage of adulthood, but also recognise Zelda to play the reincarnation of Hylia, and Link to demonstrate his courage in the Ceremony of the Goddess, a strong callback to Hylia's chosen hero in a battle with Demise. Quoting Hyrule Storia, the adventure begins when Girahim finally found Zelda in the sky. He produced a tornado that penetrated the clouds and caused her to fall to the surface. This quote notes that he had finally found Zelda at this point in time, upon the moment marking a coming of age of our protagonist. Back to Breath of the Wild, it doesn't quite add up in the way that the royal family is aware that this ritual is paramount to connecting with Hylia, and that, by order of Nehru, only someone of age 17 and above could possibly be wise enough to enter the sacred domain atop Mount Lanayru, that being the Spring of Wisdom. Being overly simplistic and by the logic shown in Skyward Sword, the act is the essential requirement of which Zelda is unable to commence until the morning of her 17th birthday. You could argue the royal family knew this, which then begs a larger question as to why King Rome would have placed this almighty pressure on a young girl who does not need to deal with that issue, particularly following the loss of both her mother and teacher. Instead, she is tasked to endure expectations that are impossible to meet over the course of a 10-year period. No wonder she appears so very defeated at the culmination of destiny with the onslaught of the Great Calamity. Who wouldn't be? And with this understanding of the significance of the ritual at the Spring of Wisdom on Zelda's 17th birthday to unlock her powers, we can then make the connection with Naydra and why she was the dragon that was infested with malice. Her position above the spring when you approach as Link reinforces her purpose. She is a sentry of sorts, monitoring via the malice eyes on her body those who come to that spring. A role critical to ensuring the timing of the calamity would be at a point where Zelda is of age for any rituals, sacrificial resurrection perhaps, but also her location is well known and her companions out of range of their divine beasts. Even the trigger timed at sunset speaks metaphorically to the change of power from light to dark, reflecting the tides of conflict unfolding over Hyrule at that very moment. If you're wondering why Link and Zelda did not see Naydra, if this was how the scenario played out, the answer could be explained in that only those blessed by the goddess Hylia will be able to observe them. That said, it is also implied that the dragons themselves can decide whether they wish to be seen, and there's no factual proof at hand as to whether either Link or Zelda would have possessed the ability to see a corrupted dragon at this crucial juncture. Referring to an interaction with Ron, a traveller between Serene Stables and Snowfield, he informs Link that, according to legend, I need the blessing of the goddess Hylia before I can see this legendary dragon. It all sounds like a fairy tale. It's viable to propose Link's ability to see them at will came with his rest in the Shrine of Resurrection, a process that left him with amnesia, making his mind similar to that of a child in the way that it is innocent, open, and curious, just like the player. Going one further, a similar encounter with an infected guardian spirit representing the goddess Hylia also occurs in Skyward Sword with Levias. This whale-type behemoth is found by this time's iteration of Link in the Thunderhead, infected by a creature called the Bylosite, which is described as a parasite with the distinguishing features of a large eye protrusion. The concept art for Levias reinforces the likeness to Malice, with the same coloured wisps streaming from the creature whilst under this type of possession. In Breath of the Wild, the remains of a Leviathan, a term used to describe a great sea creature of sorts, features a striking resemblance to Levias, down to the remora-like plate on his head, and it can be found near Death Mountain in the north of the Elden region. The skeleton lays directly in the path of another one of Breath of the Wild's enigmatic dragon deities, Dinral, on the path of his journey that involves his entry and exit from a portal in the clouds above Hyrule, almost exactly replicating the portals used in Skyward Sword by Link for traversing the cloud barrier. A layer of cloud covering designed to separate the Sky Islands raised by Hylia to protect her people from demise located on the surface world. Now, whilst it is never confirmed by Nintendo, players could make the connection that the Leviathan remains found here match those of Levias from Skyward Sword, reinforcing the connections between the games and motifs of Hylia's guardians being possessed by a corruptive force, that being Malice. Another interesting fact is that where Memory 15 occurs in Lanayru Promenade, inside the East Gate heading back to Central Hyrule, is a location afforded the nickname of Spider's Nest Mountain in the concept artwork, which doesn't make any sense unless you see the concept art for Ganon, a spider-like monstrosity that we face upon entering the Palace Sanctum. Princess Zelda's weakening powers and the hero's resurrection served as a catalyst for Ganon's revival, and when Calamity Ganon finally breaks Zelda's seal, the form is incomplete, and it resembles an enormous spider, equipped with a variety of weapons which it has absorbed from the ancient Sheikah relics used to attack it 100 years ago. The decision to label this location the Spider's Nest, the same place where Zelda returns from the Spring of Wisdom, inciting the events of the Calamity with this spider-like boss fight, seems more than a coincidence to me. It felt more like foreshadowing in how events were going to play out, and there's nothing in the concept art to even indicate any reason a label of Spider's Nest would have any relation to a spider-like creature in game, nor any reference for that matter other than the connection with this half-cooked Calamity Ganon. And once again, it comes down to events on that day and ending up in that very location. When you connect these pieces, the significance of Zelda within the story of Breath of the Wild and its sequel morph from a collection of parts to a more tangible whole. Let's review. We have callbacks to events in Ocarina of Time, Nadra's corruption, Zelda's movement on the Day of the Calamity, immediacy of the attack, concept art and foreshadowing of the Spider's Nest location. Together, we have a predetermined sequence of events underpinning the overall narrative. Another consideration is Memory Number 7, a pivotal turning point where Zelda is targeted by a Yiga assassin and saved by Link. And this moment is critical for a number of reasons, but it also helps to shape Zelda's opinion of Link, and that perception fosters a growth in their relationship. Sure, the Yiga attack Link in your adventure, but oddly enough this comes after they request him to join their ranks, a privilege poor Zelda is not afforded when we account for the attack we see in Memory Number 7. The consistent chain of events that builds up has a commonality in Princess Zelda. It is she who was targeted by the Yiga, watched by the Calamity, and harangued under pressure for some 10 years to fruitlessly train in trying to establish a connection that required something that was simply out of her control. Even the final ending of the game, unlocked with key shrines and divine beasts completed, sees Zelda acknowledging the toll the past 100 years of conflict has had on her powers, while she lays forth the program to go to Zora's kingdom for reasons relating to both Mipha's father and the functional issues surrounding Divine Beast Van Ruda. She's undergone a transformation into a confident leader, a role we see echoed in Age of Calamity which, although non-canon to the mainline series, further emphasizes the evolution of her persona. We know from interviews that Zelda was the character the team spent a majority of their time refining, a reflection of the importance that she would play in the game and, dare I say it, a sequel already projected down the line. Princess Zelda would play the narrative role, from dialogue to progression, acting to mirror the player and their growth, a linchpin to key events, and what might ultimately be the eventual rebuild of Hyrule. So when she just appears to drop helplessly into the darkness, followed closely by Link skydiving through a sea of light rushing into view, I believe Nintendo are using a sleight of hand to actively encourage the viewer to minimize Zelda's role in the sequel and draw their focus purely on Link. It's a masterful piece of imagery and symbolism, heightened further by the use of Link's outfit changes to elicit questions about the similarities to the ancient hero of the tapestry, as well as further questions about the fate of the Master Sword. While Zelda falls into darkness and silence grips the viewer, Link explodes in a flash of dazzling light to triumphant music and a sequence of exciting action and new mechanics. Kind of reminds me of an old advertisement where the announcer might say, "Hey there, are you sick of homework? Well, here's something way cooler." Questions around a playable Zelda, for example, have circled for the past 5 years, and devs and Aonuma are notoriously coy with any response and non-committal. Going back to Skyward Sword, there was even planned DLC for the game where the player will take the role of Zelda during events on the surface that Zelda and Impa played out, which were only briefly covered in the game. Yet, following the second trailer, the universal response seems to be, oh well, I guess a playable Zelda is off the cards. Most considered that this could mean that Zelda might die or be gravely injured, or play the role of damsel in distress, requiring Link to once again save the day. The thing is, it worked. Now the focus has shifted more to Link than anything else. And what's happening with that Master Sword? Heck, even I'm wondering what might happen there. The thing is, the visage of Zelda appearing to fall into a cavernous abyss, I believe, is the moment the audience has been sold the prestige. Because any outcome you think you know is based off a few minor explanations on less than 3 minutes of video and audio. Because your expectations have been finally censored, sleight of hand played, and your attention drawn exactly where the illusionist wants it. And you're in prime position to have your mind blown. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, so you can get notified about future videos and content. And if you don't want to, or can't be bothered, well, that's perfectly fine as well. There's plenty more content planned, and the next one, well, let's just say this is one I'm really looking forward to sharing with you all. It's going to touch on something a little controversial, but I think many people out there will enjoy the different perspective it offers, as it's something I know many aside from me are really wondering about. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if the last few videos are anything to go by, we've had some fantastic observations, different pieces of feedback, and really great ideas that I think make sensational theories in their own right. To those who have shown their support to the channel and joined, well, thank you so much. You guys rock. I'm blessed and humbled to have you on board. It means more than you know. As always, please take care of yourselves, keep being amazing, and I'll see you next time here on GameSmiths. Thanks for tuning in, and oh boy, have I got something interesting to show you today. To my awesome supporters, I want to start by saying thank you and assuring you that new theory content is on the way. It's going to be a set of theories actually, backed by new evidence and finds that are going to challenge what we think we know about the series, Breath of the Wild and the sequel, so stay tuned for that. What I'm about to share is less of a theory and more of an observation. Coupled with some base details within Zelda lore and events we know in Breath of the Wild, it could be much bigger. Figure this is either a massive find or it's the ravings of a Zelda theorist too far down the rabbit hole. Most likely the latter. But if I'm right, this could have significant implications on the questions we have after Breath of the Wild, from the Triforce to the biggest debate going currently, the timeline placement. Either way, I'm going to break it down for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, what's all the fuss about? Well, it comes down to this tiny bit of footage IG and Aonuma presented on the 29th of March to let fans know that the most anticipated sequel in the world will be delayed until spring 2023. The news was met with a mixed reaction, but can generally be described as disappointment. I'm not here to talk about the delay, but if this theory is correct, then our man Mr. Aonuma managed to slip in the biggest clue yet about the sequel. And if he did, I'd say it was intentional. It all comes down to this tiny bit of clothing that Link is wearing, and in particular, the Triforce reference to the base of his tunic. If you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I saw the triangles too, what's your point? Then I'd ask you to take a second look. Have you noticed anything about the pieces yet? Anything Triforce related? A triple Triforce, perhaps? If you're still puzzled, I hear you. It certainly doesn't look like 3 Triforces at first. But what if I showed it to you like this? To be fair, I haven't been able to come up with a good name for it yet, but I've dubbed it the Timeline Triforce. Sounding crazy yet? Perfect. So this find didn't come from studying the clip relentlessly, nor do I think anyone's gonna find it by that method. But if you happen to be researching Zelda lore, theorizing, reading opinions from 15 years ago, blah blah blah, and generally trying to answer some of the burning questions that we've all got, you might have found it the same way I did. Without giving too much away about upcoming content, I've been trying to align a few major narrative aspects from Breath of the Wild with the series as a whole. and to a large degree stumbling through the thickets most of us do when it comes to diving down the rabbit hole. 35 years worth of gaming's greatest stories as they contradict and challenge every concept you think you knew, from time travel to geographical movement. But the timelines within Zelda remain the biggest conundrum that simultaneously baffles newcomers whilst polarising long-term fans. When Breath of the Wild was released, it demonstrated aspects familiar to fans of the series. Iconic places from the Temple of Time to Death Mountain, callbacks of older enemies like Lynels, and even mixing races like the Zora and the Rito. The problem with all the nostalgia lies with the fact that, following the publication of Hyrule Historia and the release of Skyward Sword, Nintendo had staked a claim in the Zelda history books known as the Timeline Split. Put simply, depending on the outcome of 1998's Ocarina of Time, the games followed one of three distinct timelines. Driver of the split came down to the time-travelling mechanic at the centre of the game, the titular Ocarina. During the epic saga, a young Link and Princess Zelda conspire to collect the three spiritual stones, which act as a key to the Sacred Realm, the home of the Holy Triforce. Link was set on this task by the Great Deku Tree, and further spurred on by Zelda, who dreamt that a Gerudo leader named Ganondorf planned on taking the Triforce for his own nefarious means, the overthrow of the kingdom and total rule of Hyrule. When Link collects the three stones, he enters the Sacred Realm by claiming the Master Sword. But when he does, he enters a 7-year sleep, until he reaches an age worthy of wielding the Great Sword. Link's slumber allows Ganondorf to claim the Triforce for his own, but, to his surprise, the relic splits into three pieces upon his touch, leaving him with only the Triforce of power. It's explained that this is because the Triforce, agnostic to good or bad intentions, demands a balance of the three virtues of power, wisdom, and courage before it will grant the seeker any wish their heart desires. If found by someone with an imbalance of these virtues, it's explained that the Triforce will separate, leaving the victor with the piece of the Triforce representing their true desire, and seeking out those chosen by destiny to wield the other two. In Ocarina of Time, the Triforce of Wisdom chooses Zelda, and Link is chosen as the bearer of the Triforce of Courage. The section remaining with Ganon gives him true power, and with it he is able to conquer Hyrule, devastate the kingdom, and leave it in a state of utter chaos. Now as an adult, Link works to free the 6 sages from Ganon's grasp, and unites with Sheik, aka Princess Zelda, leading to a final showdown with Ganondorf, and finally his beast form, Ganon. The battle has 3 outcomes. Where Link wins his fight against Ganon, Princess Zelda chooses to send Link back to his childhood before his 7-year slumber, which creates both the child timeline and the adult timeline. Where Link is defeated by Ganon, however, Zelda, the 7th sage, combines her powers with the other sages to send Ganon to the Sacred Realm, creating what is known as the Fallen Timeline. And so ensues a series of adventures down 3 unique scenarios that directly follow the outcome of Ocarina of Time. And then with the release of Breath of the Wild, the callbacks to past games mentioned earlier all pointed to different timelines, and so the debates began, until the publication of Masterworks and the official stance from Nintendo came to the rescue by confirming that Breath of the Wild sat firmly at the end of all 3 timelines. To this day, this flow can be observed on the Japanese official site, showing that no matter which timeline you follow, it ultimately ends with Breath of the Wild. So the argument was settled, right? Well, not even close. If anything, this spurred on more debate. Did it mean that the timeline had united again, or did it mean that no matter what the events of each timeline, it would somehow result in the scenario of Breath of the Wild? Masterworks placed the events of Breath of the Wild so far down the chain that any prior events were just considered the era of myth, somewhere in the distant past. As far as placement goes, it couldn't be any clearer than if it was announced as a long time ago in a galaxy far away. It remains now one of the biggest mysteries as we head into the sequel, along with the location of the series staple Triforce, and finally the Master Sword, a weapon once required to defeat the original evil incarnate Demise and his reincarnation Ganondorf. So how does this all tie in with the Tri-Timeline Triforce theory? Well, it all comes down to the fate of the Triforce in each timeline prior to Breath of the Wild. Although other games occur after those I'm about to mention, they don't feature the Triforce, and the events come from Hyrule Encyclopedia, released in 2017 in Japan as part of the Goddess Trilogy of publications. Theorists will agree that this series, and indeed Masterworks, acts as a secondary guide to events following in-game story and dialogue. Even still, errors and contradictions exist, although unless otherwise stated, they're a magnificent place to research the myriad of lore surrounding the series. Now, as far as the Triforce goes, the last noted references are featured on page 13. Firstly, we have the Fallen Timeline, where The Legend of Zelda and the Adventure of Link, commonly known as Zelda 2, We see Link being called into the fray by Zelda's nursemaid Impa. Link seeks out the shards of the Triforce of Wisdom and defeats Ganon, claiming the Triforce of Power. In the sequel, Link learns of a third piece, the Triforce of Courage, which he obtains from the Great Palace and awakens the sleeping Princess Zelda. Thus, the Triforce is united. Next we have the child timeline, last referencing Twilight Princess. Ganondorf avoids annihilation in an event referred to as the Divine Prank, whereby the Triforce of Power comes to his aid during his judgment by the sages at the Arbiter's Ground. After murdering one sage, Ganon is banished to the Twilight Realm, where he manipulates a magical tribe known as the Twilight and its leader Zant, clawing his way back into the Light World. Aided by the Twilight Princess Midna, Link manages to defeat Zant and confront Ganon with the help of Princess Zelda. Ganon is ultimately defeated by Link with the Master Sword, and in what can only be described as one of the most metal deaths I've ever seen. Ganon dies standing on his feet, impaled through the chest, with the Triforce of Power fading from his hand. Hyrule Encyclopedia states the Triforce remains separated. Courage remains with Link, Wisdom with Zelda, and Power with Ganondorf, in brackets, eliminated. Yes, you heard that correctly. The Triforce of Power remains with Ganondorf after that ending. Make of that what you will. And to the adult timeline, last but certainly not least, our friend Ganondorf once again seeks the domination of Hyrule through the Triforce in the Wind Waker, with the Hyrule devastated by floods. Apparently, when the Hero of Time was sent back to live out his childhood, Hyrule was confronted by a reincarnated Ganon, and chose to do what any civilization would do at that point: beg the gods to intervene and cause mass destructive floods to avoid dealing with Ganon. The ending sees Ganon on the verge of victory, about to grasp his wish and claim the Triforce, when he is totally outplayed by this guy, King Daphnis of the Silent Shoes, aka the King of Red Lions, who beats him to the punch and wishes for, you guessed it, another flood of epic proportions to defeat Ganondorf once and for all. That'll teach him. The Triforce splits in three and flies off into the distance. Many claim it is returning to the Sacred Realm, but nothing's confirmed. Triforce does not make an appearance in either the Phantom Hourglass or Spirit Tracks games, so it's assumed that this is the final act for this timeline. Now, if you're keeping score at home, that's 3 Triforces, total of 9 pieces, just like the Tunic. Cool, but it gets a little wilder than that. 2 timelines show the Triforces are united, Fallen and Adult, but in the Child timeline, it is stated to be with those chosen by Destiny, Link, Zelda, and Ganon eliminated. Now, if we check that Tunic again and overlay the 2 united Triforces with another one that's separated, it comes out to look exactly like this. Striking resemblance to that Tunic. Where I stumbled on this was in consideration of how Breath of the Wild might be at the end of each timeline. See, I had this hunch that maybe the Child timeline was simply noted incorrectly. It didn't seem to make sense to me to have the Triforce of Power with Ganon, who was eliminated. So, assuming in that situation the Triforce was united, it would be a situation whereby, for the first time in all 3 timelines, we would have a united Triforce. Under these conditions, it made sense to me that the Triforce might be a uniting proposition, bringing the 3 timelines together back to a unified state as existed prior to Ocarina of Time and all the way back to Skyward Sword. Also explained how Breath of the Wild could be the unification of the timelines many had speculated. But that theory involves suspending belief that Hyrule Encyclopedia had a crucial error. Considering the specifics around having a page dedicated to the Triforce and the timeline, I thought it was a tough ask to ignore completely. So in reviewing the possibilities, it occurred to me that another potential solution could be that there are still 3 timelines like Nintendo's website shows and the books state. But therein would exist 3 Triforces, one for each timeline. That was crazy, right? 9 pieces of the Triforce? Well, that's impossible. And then, there it was. I mean, I'd seen it before, but because it was more than 3 pieces, I put it down to a fashion choice, reminiscent of the iconic Triforce, but more of a call than a reference. But now, considering the 3 timelines, each with its own Triforce, 2 united and 1 separate, suddenly leapt out from the screen. In-game footage for the sequel to Breath of the Wild showing the same motif I'd hastily made by combining the 3 Triforces to represent the outcomes from the timelines. So what does this mean, you might ask? Well, dear viewer, I have my own thoughts, and I imagine most of you have yours too. In the spirit of this channel, and welcoming fans to be creative and a safe space to share your theories, I think it's better if I take a lead from Nintendo and leave it open for now. It could represent all 3 timelines. The goal could be the unification of them, or it could even open up the possibility of traversing a Hyrule from each part of the timeline to collect the pieces. a definite possibility considering the iconic references already seen in Breath of the Wild and the obvious Skyward Sword call out we're seeing in the sequel trailers. One comment I read from someone on my last video mentioned how it would be a really cool idea if this Ganondorf had the combined knowledge of all the timelines, creating a super Ganon of sorts. I thought that was insanely cool. With this find, that idea is not so far-fetched now. Think about it. 3 timelines coming into play in some way in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Suddenly, the development cycle and the delays make a whole heap more sense. And if I happen to be on the money, Nintendo, from me, take all the time in the world you need to make this a reality. Now, turning my excitement down from 99 to 12, there's every chance that this is a coincidence, maybe even an Easter egg. I'm more than willing to admit the possibility, and please don't take this theory as fact. That said, I'm keen to know your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree? And if you agree, what would you be most excited to see? And if you disagree, well, that's cool too, but let me know why and what you think might happen. To be clear, I don't live in any timeline camp other than the one that accepts all ideas and celebrates them, regardless of whether I personally agree or not. I'll leave you with this speech, a select memory from Princess Zelda. It's a cutscene that's been a spark to set debate afire regarding timelines in the past, but for me, today, suddenly it's taking on a new meaning. I hope it does for you too. Thanks for watching, stay safe. I look forward to seeing you again soon here on GameSmiths.
Hero of Hyrule, chosen by the sword that seals the darkness. You have shown unflinching bravery and skill in the face of darkness and adversity, and have proven yourself worthy of the blessings of the goddess Hylia. Whether skyward bound, adrift in time, or steeped in the glowing embers of twilight, the sacred blade is forever bound to the soul of the hero. We pray for your protection, and we hope that the two of you will grow stronger together as one.
Oh no! The blood moon rises. Ganon's magic waxes strongest now. The monsters who run the land, their souls have returned to them. They've arisen.
Hi, and hope you're having a great day, and thanks for watching this video. There's no doubt it's an exciting time to be a Zelda fan. With the release of Skyward Sword HD, and more information coming to light regarding the sequel to Breath of the Wild, there's never been a better time to revisit the land of Hyrule and its many mysteries, many of which remain unsolved. Recently, we were treated to a second trailer for the proposed Breath of the Wild 2 game, suggesting a release date in 2022. The trailer followed up the initial reveal from Nintendo way back in 2019, when the first trailer released, indicating that a sequel was in development. This first trailer presented fans with a dark theme, filled with mysterious transitions and fast-paced edits that left enthusiasts worldwide speculating on the potential direction of the hotly anticipated sequel. And whilst the first trailer kept a thematic tone, confining its imagery to a tight section of the overall narrative, the more recent trailer released at E3 this year heightened the sense of duality the series has come to be known for by including brighter gameplay segments and more colourful imagery. One of the most significant aspects to this reveal was the announcement that gameplay for Breath of the Wild 2 would include exploration in the skies. The imagery of the protagonist diving from the heavens through the clouds with floating islands adorning the backdrop was a familiar sight to many longtime fans. This scene almost mirrored the hook for the release of the divisive origin story in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. In my first video covering the potential of a playable Zelda in Breath of the Wild 2, I commented on the notion that the release of Skyward Sword, along with an anthology of Zelda lore known as the Goddess Collection, signalled a change in the direction of the franchise, with a somewhat structured plan to the world being considered and evidenced in the releases that would follow. It's no surprise then that many have noticed common themes arising between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. But is there more that we can find in the detail of secrets hidden in the past that might shine a light on the future of Breath of the Wild 2? I believe there is, so today, please join me as I discuss some mysterious clues that show a connection to Breath of the Wild and its upcoming sequel. Number 1. The Rito. The Rito are a bird-like race who first appeared in The Wind Waker with their village located on Dragon Roost Island. The Legend of Zelda Encyclopedia describes them as bird-like Hyruleans, with roots linking them to the Zora from Ocarina of Time, who evolved to the Rito following the Great Flood, which submerged Hyrule under the sea in the adult timeline. The book goes on to state that the Rito are not born with the ability to fly, and that only when they have proven themselves as adults can they receive a scale from their guardian deity Velu and obtain their wings. This explanation of the origins of the Rito have left more than a few enthusiasts puzzled, and for obvious reason. Why a waterbound tribe like the Zora, perfectly suited for life in a world dominated by a vast expansive ocean, would evolve into a bird-like form where the ability to fly is not guaranteed, seems a little strange. Whilst it can be argued that the Zora in Ocarina of Time survived in a freshwater environment, evolving to adapt to seawater would seem more in line with expectations, particularly when we consider this seems to be the case for the Zora we see in Majora's Mask. This piece of information has also been a critical element in timeline placement when it comes to debates surrounding Breath of the Wild, with many pointing to the inclusion of the Rito in this new version of Hyrule as evidence of a placement in the adult timeline due to this particular connection. If there was one topic amongst the Zelda community that stirs fear into the hearts of any enthusiast, it would be the Zelda timeline. So for this reason, I won't be entering into that part of the debate for this particular theory. When Breath of the Wild was released in 2017, a new entry in the Zelda Written Chronicles was released, dubbed Creating a Champion for Western audiences. This particular tome describes the Rito different from those we've seen in prior versions. It explains how they have powerful winged arms, which has helped them earn the reputation as rulers of the sky. Developer notes on page 129 from artist Hirohito Shinoda confirm the appearance has changed dramatically to emphasise their unique characteristics as a race. Page 130 goes even further, stating that the Rito are a combination of the traits of birds and Hylians, and that they prefer to eat meat or fish, similar to what you would see in typical birds of prey. This description is contrary to that provided in the Rito we see in The Wind Waker, and makes no reference to a lineage of evolution from the Zora. The Rito we see in-game during Breath of the Wild are capable of flight soon after birth, as evidenced in the Shrine Quest recital at Warbler's Nest. There is no Velu present in the game either, suggesting that the power of flight is a characteristic of this incarnation of the Rito, as opposed to something that they earn, as we see in the Wind Waker. Creating a champion almost appears to go out of its way to distance itself from the previous iteration, stating clearly that the Rito are a mix of bird-like and Hylian features. So, if this iteration of the Rito we see in Breath of the Wild is not the same as those we've seen in the Wind Waker, then where did this incarnation of the Rito hail from? To help answer this question, we need only look to Skyward Sword and the concept art provided for that game. Hyrule Historia, the first book in the Goddess series, was released in 2011 and coincided with the 25th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series, as well as the release of Skyward Sword. In the concept art for the inhabitants of Skyloft, artists make reference to how they approach the style of the Hylian inhabitants of this floating haven. In particular, they describe how they assigned bird-like characteristics to each individual, with some specific examples fairly noticeable within the game. A quote is provided from designer Hirono, which states, "In the beginning it was decided that all residents of Skyloft would be modelled after birds. That's where the idea to give Henya a rooster's body came from. Grease's pointy hairstyle was inspired by a rooster's comb, and Owlin and Horwell's designs were based on the Rito tribe from the Wind Waker." Chronologically speaking, Skyward Sword was released after the Wind Waker, well and truly after the decision had been made to link the Rito from the aforementioned game to the Zora in Ocarina of Time. If the timing of these decisions and odd connections has you confused, well then you wouldn't be alone. But maybe I can shed some light on what the developers intended with this design choice in Skyward Sword. By creating a clear distinction in the bird-like traits of the Hylians in Skyward Sword, a race who are coupled with the giant Loftwings during this era, I believe the developers were creating an alternative proposition to the evolution of the Rito that we see appear in Breath of the Wild. The end of Skyward Sword indicates that Zelda and Link have chosen to live on the surface of Hyrule, but it doesn't confirm the choices of all the inhabitants in Skyloft, nor what happens to Skyloft itself. In this scenario, it becomes reasonable to assume that if some of the Hylians chose to stay in Skyloft, high above the clouds, that the natural course of evolution already apparent in the bird-like features some of them possessed would continue. That eventually these Hylians might have evolved into bird-like Hylians, such as the Rito we see in Breath of the Wild. In fact, the Rito crest itself bears a striking resemblance to a combination of the top of the Hylian crest, the bird claw worn by Gaepora, and the bottom of the crest from Kurami. Going further, this concept would explain how the Rito came to exist in the same Hyrule that contains the race of Zora, a fact that has been the source of much speculation and debate since the game released. But could it mean more? Could the Rito have a heritage dating back to the times of Skyloft in Skyward Sword, which translates to a connection to the Sky Islands that we see in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. There is very little information provided in relation to the backstory of some of the races we see in Breath of the Wild, and this connection would be a great way to further flesh out this side of the narrative, further uniting the inhabitants of Hyrule in their shared past and impending future. Whilst this is only theoretical, this new view of the Rito and how they fit into the wider history of Hyrule is an exciting idea, and one I would personally love to see explored more in the sequel. Number 2, the Blood Moon. One of the craziest things to happen to players not expecting it in the game is their experience when they encounter their first blood moon. The skies, whilst already dark, seem to take on a more sinister edge. Like the calm before the storm, the feeling that washes over the player is a sense of foreboding, a deep dread building as slowly flickers of blood-soaked embers cross your path, building in intensity with every second that passes. With the audio of the game complementing the ominous mood perfectly, the uneasiness builds to a crescendo until the screen is almost completely drenched in a crimson doom. The blood moon is rising.
Link! Be on your guard. Ganon's power grows. It rises to its peak under the hour of the blood moon. By its glow, the aimless spirits of monsters slain in the name of the light return to flesh. Link, please be careful.
It's here that the player learns of the cycle prompted by the blood moon, the rebirth of slain enemies, and the sudden realization that there is no hiding from the calamity. With all dramatics aside, it's a great mechanic that achieves numerous ends. Aside from the seemingly random nature and involvement in Shrine Quest, the Blood Moon serves a purpose in keeping the world stocked with challenges as the player progresses, slowly increasing difficulty in the form of reborn enemies with new, stronger capabilities, and on occasion, different drops for the player as well. Some 4 years on, the Blood Moon has almost petered out of consciousness, much like the effects slowly drift off in-game. players becoming more accustomed to the event simply move on without taking too much notice. So you might find it surprising then to realise that an object appearing similar to the Blood Moon appears in concept art for the sealed incarnation of the original Demon King demise, known as the Imprisoned. Whilst there are a few renders of the Imprisoned, the one relating specifically to his third form is set in front of what can only be described as an image eerily similar to that of the Blood Moon we see in Breath of the Wild. The depiction in Hyrule Historia goes even deeper, with a focus on the scales and commentary explaining that the red layer is extremely important to the look of the character. But whilst it might be easy to simply write this one off, as we did not see Demise in Breath of the Wild, we have seen glimpses in the trailer of a new antagonist. With all good reasoning and based on the prominent Gerudo symbols, this corpse-like being appears to be Ganondorf, who, in the lore of the Legend of Zelda, is readily inferred to be the reincarnation of the Demon King Demise, down to his crimson hair representing the flames we see coming from the head of Demise. But the connections don't end there. In Skyward Sword, Fi shares some interesting dialogue about Demise. Specifically, she states, "This eternal being has conquered time itself. It is the source of all monsters. According to tales passed down through generations, it appears differently in each epoch and to each person who lays eyes on it." Now, a being that has conquered time itself is the source of all monsters, who can appear different depending on the era and the individual who perceives them, and is also implied to be none other than Ganondorf himself. Strange, huh? Could it be possible that Demise, the source of the curse who bound his malice and hatred to the chosen hero and the reincarnation of the goddess Hylia, is the driving source behind the Blood Moon events we see in Breath of the Wild? And if so, what could this mean in the sequel? I've wondered about this ever since the end of Breath of the Wild, whether the Blood Moon would feature in a sequel or title in the future. If it was tied to the calamity as a direct consequence of that event, or if it was something more, perhaps tied to the source of the calamity. The occurrences are alleged to have been increasing and even seemingly having an effect on some of the characters that you meet in-game. For example, there's a character you can find in Dueling Peaks stable named Hino, a regular looking chap with a fascination surrounding the Blood Moon phenomenon. Aside from being more than happy to tell Link all about the topic, Hino can also provide the player information on the moon for that particular night. Moreover, Hino will share a specific line warning the player to expect a blood moon when it's on the horizon. He says, "I'm getting that feeling again. Something is going to happen tonight. I can taste it. Tonight is the blood moon, at last." Even more strange is what happens if Link tries to interact with Hino during one of these events. In what is one of the most bizarre interactions of the game, Hino will begin acting irrationally, running around in a circle like an unhinged madman, spouting lines such as, "Here it comes. Blood. It's so red, so gloriously red. My blood. It's boiling," and "Arise, monsters." What is fascinating about this is that Hino makes no mention of the blood moon being caused by the calamity and doesn't seem to make any connection with it. He simply states that whenever the clock strikes midnight on unlucky nights, the sky turns blood red. That's the blood moon, he says. And when that happens, monsters come back to life, no matter how many times you've defeated them. It's happened for so long now that no one really pays it any mind, but I have no plans to give up on my research. Many point to the calamity as the driver of the blood moon. Zelda is a prime example, who announced Ganon's power growing during this particular event. But she simply states that Ganon's power grows under the blood moon, peaking during the event. We see the same effect on monsters who are essentially reincarnated during a blood moon, as well as Hino, who turns into a can and a half of crazy during this particular event. Delving further, more information can be found in Creating a Champion, which provides a direct connection between the blood moon and the calamity. It cites specifically that Calamity Ganon is actively being suppressed by Princess Zelda. Its power still bleeds out into Hyrule and occasionally causes a phenomenon known as Night of the Red Moon, or simply the Blood Moon. Ganon's malice stains the sky a deep red, and the monsters that Link has slain return. Any effort Link puts into reclaiming a territory from the monsters is an exercise in futility. Their forces will inevitably return. In order to ensure that the people of Hyrule are safe, the source of evil, Calamity Ganon, must be defeated. What is interesting about this description is where it specifically highlights the source of evil as the key, but refers to Calamity Ganon. Considering Breath of the Wild was focused on Calamity Ganon as the primary antagonist, this is not surprising, but it does provide a clue as to what we might be facing in the sequel. If the source is not the manifestation of Ganon's hatred, the boss we see in the first title, then it's much more likely this description is referring to the mummified remains of the Gerudo King we see in the trailer for the sequel, spewing forth concentrated malice. It would make sense that this concept art provides a clue to the connection between Demise and the malice, including the Blood Moon. And if we refer back to the quote from Fi, creation of the goddess Hylia herself, this eternal being has conquered time itself and is the source of all monsters. It is only logical then for us to see how Demise's curse still affects the world, whether this be through his reincarnated form of Ganondorf, the Blood Moon, or the driving hatred and malice that has been corrupting the world of Breath of the Wild and likely to play a huge role in the sequel. Number 3. The Torii Gates. Found within the same concept art for Skyward Sword is the illustrative work surrounding the sealed grounds which house the imprisoned on the surface. The particular section of note is the same area where the statue of the goddess Hylia comes to rest following Link's wish on the Triforce. In the concept art, the spiral-like pattern of the area housing the imprisoned is explained from a mechanic standpoint as a way for the player to be able to see his foe during the multiple encounters during the game. Among the concepts for how these battles might work within the environment, one particular idea points to the utilization of impediment gates. The translation from the Japanese text states impediment gates, gates that act as impediments for the boss. The big boss destroys them. It's like a Japanese torii gate, and there will be several along the lowest path. Whilst described and featured as part of the concept art for the game, these torii gates were not realised in the final design and what the player actually experiences during the event. Structures appear in the drawings, though, to be made of a stone-like material, formed by large slabs in a brick-like structure, which bears more than a passing resemblance to another interesting structure being discussed at length in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. When we see the gameplay sections involving the Sky Islands during the trailer, almost all of the islands visible appear to have a stone-like torii gate, usually found adorning the edge of each landmass. Could the torii gates referred to in the concept art for Skyward Sword signify a connection to what we see in the sequel? Well, a fair argument against this could be the incorporation of certain themes and motifs spanning across the games already. For example, Breath of the Wild's art director, Satoru Takizawa, revealed that the general art design of the assorted Sheikah technology was inspired by the Jomon period of Japanese history, which Takizawa says is an era few are familiar with. Reviewing the inspirations for the core designs in the game, the Guardians seem to be clearly inspired by an upside-down Jomon pot, but canny players will likely be familiar with this shape already, with a similar motif being present in the Lanayru province in Skyward Sword. This shot almost looks like a scene out of Breath of the Wild, minus a few legs, claws, and life-threatening lasers. Whilst this could simply be coincidental in nature, the use of torii gates in the concept art surrounding the sealed grounds, and specifically with the intention of impeding a boss character, may hint at a possible connection to Torii gates we see in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. Of note, the build of the Torii gates using stone blocks is also unique to each section, further strengthening this connection. The other notable use of Torii gates in Breath of the Wild can be seen in the entry points to Kakariko Village. As I'm not an expert, I'll refer to an article from Architecture of Zelda, an amazing site created by Talbot, which I highly recommend, and I'll put the link in the description. Talbot comments, 2 principal paths into Kakariko Village are each marked by 2 main torii. These gates, instead of having 2 main posts, have 4, and these posts are square in shape, not circular, creating a distinct torii of the Sheikah. And while each set of 2 posts has a large extending lintel, as in traditional torii design, there is only one shared crossbeam uniting the structure in its centre, which is further buttressed by 3 similar wooden beams. 2 curved beams unite the structure at its top, carrying red cloth as symbolic drapery. But the most notable difference is the triangular beam that dominates the gate, almost like an empty gable of a roof. Thus far, I have not found another torii with this distinctive design, which shows a large departure from tradition in Sheikah design, solidifying the unique cultural milieu. At its topmost point, this beam bears an open eye of polished metal, creating a watchful feeling on the path. Red ropes wind around the bottom of each post, echoing the red of the cloth above, and from the lintels and crossbeams are hung 4 pennants, 3 with the eye of the Sheikah, and 1 with an unexplained symbol, a triangle, floating above fading lines. The site also lends a quote from Kato, one of the Sheikah found in the village. We of the Sheikah tribe have long been heralded as people of great wisdom. Our technology became the key to sealing Ganon away during the Great Calamity some 10,000 years ago, and at one point, our technology was praised as the power of the gods. But eventually the people turned on it, turned on us. Our creations came to be viewed as a threat to the kingdom. The Sheikah became outcasts, forced into exile. Some, like us, chose to cast off our technological advances and strove to live normal lives. The Sky Islands we see in the second trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 appear to be beyond a natural phenomena, and the closest comparison made to the designs and formations that comprise these Sky Islands is that seen in the shrine challenges presented in Breath of the Wild. With these Torii gates we have connections to the Sheikah yet again, that also predate the ancient time in Skyward Sword, with concept art suggesting stone Torii gates might have been employed in the sealing grounds to hold the imprisoned form of Demise. This area was specifically watched over by Impa of the Sheikah, who had been serving the goddess Hylia directly. Whilst a topic for another video, I found myself wondering for some time where the rest of the mysterious Sheikah tribe are, both prior to and during the events of Skyward Sword. The term tribe has connotations of a group, implies that there was more Sheikah around this time other than Impa. We see no evidence of them on the surface world during the events of Skyward Sword, other than the remnants left behind, for example the Gossip Stones. Could it be possible that when the Hylians were raised to the Sky Islands during the conflict between Demise and Hylia, that the Sheikah also created a life high above the clouds to sustain their existence beyond the battle, ensuring that they had ongoing protection in place for Hylia and her reincarnated form, that of the Princess Zelda. We know their technical and scientific abilities were extremely advanced, so much in fact that they were banished by the very royal family they were protecting some 10,000 years ago. We never really get an answer to a few mysteries surrounding the Sheikah in Breath of the Wild, including the large telescopes present on the ancient tech labs in Hateno and Akala, or the constellation markings which adorn nearly all Sheikah architecture. Had this tribe, mysterious and ancient, who act as the scribes of a history long forgotten, built a civilization above the cloud barrier that has remained hidden to this day? The possibility becomes more plausible when we consider the city in the sky and the Oka, who appeared in Twilight Princess. Again, another ancient civilization who were advanced in magic and built a civilization above the clouds in the time before the Hylians. It seems odd that records dating back to this time are notably incomplete, especially considering the advanced level of the Sheikah tribe and their intimate relationship with the goddess and her reincarnation. The Torii gates found in the concept art for Skyward Sword adds another connection between this ancient tribe, the origin of the cycle, and events we are likely to see play out in Breath of the Wild 2. So what do you think? Can you see some direct connections in the concept art for Skyward Sword and what we've seen so far in the trailers for Breath of the Wild 2? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave your views in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please take the time to leave a like and subscribe. I'm still very new to this whole platform, and it would be great to know if you'd like to see more of this type of content. As always, thanks for being amazing, and see you next time. The 12th of June 2022, 1 week from now, marks the 3rd anniversary of the first teaser trailer for the sequel to Breath of the Wild. The ominous presentation provided a dichotomy to the original game's trailer, which basked in the freedom of exploration and open spaces of a Hyrule unleashed from linear design. In this trailer, the space was claustrophobic and sinister, a dark journey through the underground caves, climaxing with Link and Zelda coming across the mummified remains, what has universally been understood to be the remains of Ganondorf, King of the Gerudo. Adding to the tension is the mystery of a strange green hand planted firmly on the chest, streaming in spirals to the ceiling, comprised of swirling text reminiscent of Gerudo symbology. The trailer ends with the ground shaking, images of Link and Zelda appearing to fall as the mummy comes to life, with the green hand taking center stage as it reaches out to Link, creating a fusion with his arm and a flurry of action shots and dramatic sounds. Overall, the trailer created a buzz of speculation and excitement as fans wondered what this might mean for the sequel as a whole. And although we've since been blessed with more footage in the second reveal trailer at E3 in 2021, and some 7 seconds or so on the delay announcement by IG Enuma, details still remain sparse and some of the biggest mysteries from the first trailer remain unanswered. Of these, arguably the greatest mystery surrounds the green hand. Who or what is it? And what role does it play, not only in the events we see in the trailer, but also in how Link's gameplay might be affected in Breath of the Wild 2. Today, I'm going to put forward an idea as to who the hand might belong to, as well as reasons why it makes a lot of sense considering what we know currently. You see, I think that the hand that is gripping so tightly to the mummified remains we see in the trailer is the hand of Ganondorf himself. Now let me tell you why. Before we kick off, please note that spoilers for Twilight Princess and other games in the franchise will arise, so be warned. The most obvious question you might have at this point is how Ganondorf can be holding Ganondorf, which is a really valid point. To explain, I think the owner of the hand is not Ganondorf from this world or era. No, I believe the hand is that of Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. And I've got more than a few reasons to back this up. So let's get into them. As a quick refresher, Twilight Princess occurs in the child timeline and following the events of Ocarina of Time. In this chronology, Ganon is eventually captured and set to execution at the Arbiter's grounds by the Seven Sages. Before his death, however, Ganon is imbued with the power of the Triforce of Power, allowing him to break his confinements and instantly murder one of the sages in retribution. The remaining sages realize that Ganon's power is simply too great, and thus the Mirror of Twilight is used to banish Ganon to exile in the Twilight Realm, the very same place a rebellious faction known as the Interlopers had been sent in Hyrule's past, when their potent magic threatened the royal family and the kingdom at large. Many years on, Ganon manages to build back his strength and forms an alliance with Zan, prince of the ruling family in Twilight, offering to house his power within the young dissident, and eventually leading to the invasion of Hyrule by the Twilight, an incident that kicks off the events of the game. At the end of Twilight Princess, the scene shows Ganon impaled by the Master Sword, with the Triforce of power fading before he looks up to see Zant. Zant performs a neck crack which appears to end Ganon, then mysteriously disappears. Midna is restored by the light spirits and destroys the Mirror of Twilight as she exits Hyrule to head home. A lot happens. So how does this relate to what we see in the trailer? Well, let me explain. It is heavily implied throughout the series that the Triforce of Power grants unimaginable strength to its bearer, rendering them virtually indestructible. Now, although Ganon is impaled with the sword at the end of the game, implying his death at the hands of the hero Link, Ganon has survived the same injury when confronted with the sages. You might argue that the Triforce of Power had left him, but Hyrule Encyclopedia suggests that the Triforce of Power remains within Ganon, but notes him as eliminated, quote unquote. I find eliminated to be a strange term to use here, especially considering the document goes out of its way to imply that Ganondorf still retains the Triforce of Power. How can you retain a Triforce of Power when you've been eliminated? So here's how I believe this curious scene plays out. In the scene where Zant explains his rise to power over Midna, he reflects on his meeting with Ganon, who states that he will house his power within Zant, that being the power of the Triforce piece he retains. Zant even goes so far as to say that his master would resurrect him, a curious fact that hints that there's more to this union than initially thought. So when Zant mysteriously appears right at the end of the battle between Link and Ganondorf, I believe that Ganon's essence or spirit is transferred to Zant then and there, where he lives on, whisked back to the Twilight Realm. In the critical scene, we witness Ganon make a prophetic threat. Do not think that this ends here. The history of light and shadow will be written in blood. Following this, he looks down at his hand, which shows the Triforce of Power blinking, indicating it's running low on batteries, not leaving him, as most believe. He then looks up to see his apprentice, where the two meet eyes prior to Zant performing the neck snap that removes all signs of life from Ganon's eyes. It is in that moment that Ganon is transferred within Zant, performing the neck snap to ensure that Link and Zelda would be convinced that Ganondorf's truly gone. And if you're wondering why Midna would not immediately seek assistance if she stumbled upon Zant when she travelled back to the Twilight Realm, this can easily be explained by her decision to shatter the Mirror of Twilight. In this act, she chose to cut off her communication with the Light World, thus any threats awaiting her on return would be unknown to Link and Zelda, as they peacefully strode off into the sunset. But there's much more to this connection than convenient plot hole. The crack of the neck Zant performs that is implied to end Ganon is ironically the exact same action we see the mummified corpse commit in the trailer as it comes back to life in the crescendo of events that follow. It happens in a way that mimics the movement to precision. I don't think it's a coincidence. But maybe you need more convincing. Well, luckily there's plenty more evidence to support the theory. In reviewing the position of the alleged Ganondorf in the trailer, his figure appears to be unceremoniously wrought back over itself, arms flailed out to his sides as if in an agonizing scream. It's the kind of action that sticks with you. It's something you don't see very often, if ever. So you might be interested to know that that exact same action is performed by none other than Zant himself in his monologue to Link and Midna in the events of Twilight Princess. But wait, there's more. If we assume that the hand is that of Ganondorf from Twilight Princess, the union with Link in the trailer begins to make much more sense, acting as a means of possession, which Ganon has used before, when possessing Princess Zelda in Twilight Princess to be his puppet. The effect on Zelda's body is very similar, showing a dark discoloration and similar patterns to the skin as we see on Link once the union is complete. In Twilight Princess, Ganon mentions how the hatred and malice of the Twilight Realm was his nourishment, and it's not unreasonable to think that the same connection he has to malice in the Twilight Realm, appearing to Zant in a ball of malice energy himself, would not create a similar draw in the world of Breath of the Wild, an environment plagued by the physical manifestation of malice. We know Ganondorf is a very powerful mage, and the spell binding the hand to the mummified remains could be argued as a skill few would possess other than Ganon himself. Another observation in Breath of the Wild that supports this idea is the second last entry in Zelda's diary, where she states, "I had a dream last night. In a place consumed by darkness, a lone woman gazed at me, hallowed by a blinding light. I sensed she was not of this world. I don't know if she was a fairy or a goddess, but she was beautiful. Her lips spoke urgently, but her voice did not reach me. Would I have heard her if my power was awoken? Or was my dream simply a manifestation of my fears? I'm sure I will know the answers soon, whether I wish to or not." Zelda refers to a lone, beautiful woman in a place consumed by darkness, speaking urgently with her words not reaching Zelda. Sounds very much like Midna to me. In fact, Midna is the first person that comes to mind when reading this diary entry. Should it be Ganon trying to return to Hyrule once again through this mysterious ritual under the depths of Hyrule's underground, then no doubt Midna would be doing her best to warn this incarnation of the spirit of the goddess. After all, it was Zelda who saved her life in Twilight Princess, a kindness Midna would be desperate to repay, considering the impending threat that awaits should Ganondorf succeed. And then of course there's the other factors that reinforce the connection between these two worlds. In Twilight Princess, Ganon turns into Dark Beast Ganon, the same title as that we see in Breath of the Wild. But whereas in Breath of the Wild and other entries, Ganon's beast form is his final manifestation, Twilight Princess differs. Here, Dark Beast Ganon is the second phase of a battle that goes through 4 distinct phases, including one on horseback, and finally a showdown of swords whilst on foot. This doesn't align with the typical progression nor the proposed history for Breath of the Wild. In fact, whilst many have aligned Ganon's transformation to Dark Beast Ganon as the pivotal moment referred to in History of Hyrule from creating a champion, cursory glance shows that this is not the case. Ganon did transform, but ultimately he transformed back into Ganondorf for another 2 phases of the battle, at the end of which no such sealing ritual takes place as described in the events from the distant past. In respect to the mummified body, I wholeheartedly agree that he is not Ganon from Twilight Princess. For one, his ears differ in the fact that they are rounded and not pointy. It could be inferred then that Mummy Ganon is from a different time or era, purely based on the assumption that he has never assumed the Triforce of power. You see, in Ocarina of Time it was demonstrated that Ganon, when under the influence of the Triforce, evolved pointed ears like that of the Hylians over a period of time. Under this premise, it could be a situation whereby the version of Ganon we see in Breath of the Wild is a victim of the ritual, designed to bring the original Dark Ganondorf back to the Light World and using a variant of himself to enable the transition. The hand appears to be clutching at the corpse's chest, and this could be Twilight Princess Ganon holding the heart of his own incarnation in this world to find his way back, as the Mirror of Twilight was broken by Midna. This connection is also allowing him to feed off the malice being drawn into the figure beneath him, evidenced by the malice traversing up the hand almost akin to a parasite feeding. I also think that the mummified version of Ganon looks like he was wearing restraints. The bracelets on his wrists have chains hanging from them, and appear more like restraints than jewelry to me. This figure is draped in robes, not armoured as we typically see Ganon in other games, and his position in the middle of this space harkens to a sacrificial altar, similar to those that we see in real life. Surrounding this event are pointed stone intrusions that, oddly enough, bear striking resemblance to those adorning the light spirit springs we see in Twilight Princess. Patterns on the rock are unique to that game alone, and it seems strange to have them feature in this critical scene if no connection was intended. Finally, we have Palmyra Ruins, a shrine quest involving the collection of pieces for a mirror that bears more than a striking resemblance to the Mirror of Twilight. Now, whilst this piece in Breath of the Wild is not the exact same mirror we see in Twilight Princess, it does share a similar design to the Dark Mirror, one featured in Four Swords Adventure, a game where history describes an identical scenario involving the banishment of a tribe of ancient magic wielders to another realm, in this case the Dark World, whereby a new incarnation of Ganondorf stole a sacred trident from the Gerudo tribe and brought a malevolent army into the fray in an attempt to gain power over the kingdom. Sounds familiar? The same point acts as a counter to the claim that Twilight Princess Ganon could still be alive. I mean, after all, considering the new incarnation of Ganondorf featured in Four Sword Adventures occurs after the events of Twilight Princess, how could that be? With only one male Gerudo born every 100 years to the Gerudo tribe, how could a new male Gerudo be born and named Ganon if the old incarnation was still alive, you might ask? Well, again, this could be answered in understanding that they are different realms entirely. That when Twilight Princess Ganon returned to the Twilight Realm, he left his physical body in Hyrule, which was quote-unquote eliminated, opening the Gerudo tribe up to the next incarnation of a male within their ranks. There's more to support this theory, but for the sake of time, I think I'll leave it there for now. To be fair though, I can accept the many reasons why people might dispute this entirely. For example, some might say that Breath of the Wild is a reboot of the franchise, and thus the inclusion of a character from a past game would feel forced and out of place, which is fair enough. Alternatively, it could be argued that the hand is performing more of a good deed. trying to hold the malice at bay, and makes the tough decision to save Link. Again, I can understand that other ideas or points of view exist and could even be more likely in the sequel, but let me leave you with one more intriguing thought. Let's imagine that Ganon prophesized his threat at the end of Twilight Princess, that the conflict was far from over and that the history of light and shadow would be written in blood. Suddenly, this dialogue would mean a lot more and have far greater consequence than most would assume, particularly when you consider that microsecond shot where we see the hand reach for the mummy's chest in a burst of light and shadow. You could almost call it foreshadowing. And one last concept for you. Should this hand indeed be that of Ganondorf, the same from Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, adorned with the Triforce of power, then what would happen if he combined with Link in the same arm, with a 50% share or something along those lines, with Link carrying the Triforce of courage? Could you imagine? Maybe he'd have a new symbol of sorts. Anyway, that's simply one idea about the mysterious hand. Will no doubt play a massive role in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. But what do you think? Do you agree with the ideas put forward, or have some other ideas of your own that you think will better suit the narrative? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment and let me know what you think. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. I hear Lionel earns another arrow every time you do, so keep that in mind. On a side note, a massive thanks to my supporters. I really can't thank you enough. You guys rock. Thank you also to those who responded in relation to the Discord channel. I'm pleased to say the basics are nearly there, and just a few things left to finalise before I send out a link to you all. Thanks for being patient in the meantime, but rest assured it is coming. I've got a very interesting video also already underway, so keep an eye out for that, as well as more theories than Korok seeds, so there's plenty more coming your way. As always, thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time here on GameSmiths.
I must protect everyone.
Hi there, hope you're having a great day. My name is Jeremy, and welcome to this video by Team GameSmiths. In 2017, Breath of the Wild released to both critical and fan acclaim. Heralded as one of the best games of all time, Breath of the Wild exceeded expectations by engaging players in a unique world. Freeform exploration, player-driven narrative, and immersion have all helped to keep Breath of the Wild relevant, even many years following its initial release. Even today, players are still finding secrets in the game, finding new challenges, or, in the example of what we see amongst the community, speculating on the larger lore and where Breath of the Wild fits. This is not only in reference to the much debated timeline, but also about some of the core tenets that have comprised the Zelda franchise over the course of 35 years. Like many others, I've found myself wondering what these mysteries mean, what story beats represent in terms of the larger narrative, and, for the sake of this video, what this means moving forward. If Breath of the Wild achieved one goal, it was capturing the imagination of the fans and investing them in the characters, the land of Hyrule, and the legend that is Zelda. Fast forward to 2019, and a new sequel to Breath of the Wild was announced, sending fans into a spin. Full of theories and speculation. To add to the chaos, Nintendo released the first trailer, an artistic masterpiece of intrigue and drama. The trailer, in under 2 minutes, provided fans with more questions than answers. Is that Ganondorf? What happened to Link's hand? Why did Zelda cut her hair? Yeah, that's right. And of course, the topic being discussed in this video, will Zelda finally be playable? With the recent trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 released by Nintendo at E3, a collective sigh was heard across the world when, in the first 30 seconds of the trailer, Zelda seemed to fall into an abyss. Yeah. Never to be seen again for the rest of the trailer, many fans, including much-loved Zelda theorists, surmised this put the playable Zelda question to bed. The common analysis suggested that Zelda would once again be in peril, with Link her only hope to rescue her. But I don't think I'm alone when I say this feels a little out of place for me. It seems too old school, convenient, and dare I say it, obvious. With the foundation of breaking conventions literally built into the DNA of the development of Breath of the Wild, the whole helpless damsel in distress fate for Zelda doesn't seem to fit the bill. In fact, it fits perfectly with Nintendo's clever marketing, carefully drip-feeding limited information to build the appropriate hype at the right time. I'm not saying Nintendo are trying to mislead us. Or am I? Now, to be fair, I'm new to the whole YouTube creator scene. Hell, I don't even really know what I'm doing. This is like my first video. But in preparing for this video, I've done my own research to help answer this question. But these are simply my opinions, some of which have likely been raised, maybe covered by some in the community, whether by posts or videos. And to the best of my knowledge, I haven't come across anyone who has put together a substantial argument as to why the titular character of Zelda might be playable in Breath of the Wild 2. The best reasons I've seen to date include that her hair is shorter, so similar modelling can be applied as it has been done with Link, as well as, now she's free for Calamity. Following the first trailer, the question becomes more relevant based on a really convenient observation. Link and Zelda are seen together in the trailer. Whilst these reasons might apply, they don't really sway me as a person. To be clear, I've been looking at this theory from the perspective of a long-time fan who has introduced his daughter into the world of Zelda and Breath of the Wild. Having the perspective of someone younger, invested in the character and innocent to the factors of game development, commercial success and tradition, I found myself looking for reasons based on things I know are more tangible. As such, this video won't definitively answer whether Zelda will or won't be playable. I mean, anyone who claims to know this for fact either know something the rest of us don't, I'm looking at you, Nintendo, or have time travel capabilities. No, the reasons I will outline come down to some good old-fashioned knowledge of the world, the Zelda franchise, interviews, and research, mixed with a hint of speculation. With that covered, let's dive into the mystery. Will Zelda be playable in Breath of the Wild 2? Like I said, I tend to look at gaming from my point of view. It's a natural bias and one most of us fall victim to. Having a daughter and wife that have embraced gaming as an outlet and part of their life has provided me an opportunity to review that perspective. I mean, growing up I could identify with Link. He's a character a young boy can easily project himself onto, especially when it comes to adventuring. But what if you're a girl? Well, the reality is that's not so easy. And times, they're changing. Various surveys show a trend in gaming inclusivity. The percentage of female gamers is on the rise. In a survey in 2017, statistics show that 46% of gamers across 13 countries were female. More recently, an article in Forbes in March showed that 41% of gamers in the United States were female. And Asia, which accounts for 48% of the world's total gaming revenue, now comprised 40 to 45% of female gamers, according to Google and Nico Partners. And so what does this mean? Well, before you get started in the comments section, let me be clear. You can have whatever opinion you want on what that means. Whether you agree or not is irrelevant. The fact is that female representation in games is increasing. Indeed, it's also increasing not just in terms of players, but creators, developers, influencers, and more importantly, the consumer. It's compelling to think about. Ubisoft have recently been facing this head on, providing a female option in games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Valhalla, and even more directly as the protagonist in Phoenix Rising. Nintendo has built a commercial legacy on some key characters. Main examples include Mario and Link, although it should be noted that Sheamus has been a staple for Nintendo in the Metroid series, albeit under a helmet. Is it time for Nintendo to embrace a new female protagonist? If so, Zelda would provide the perfect platform. I mean, she already has a massive fan base, established lore, and more recently has proven to be a playable proposition in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Leading me to my next reason. Zelda is playable.
With all of us together, we shall prevail.
I have to give a shout out here to my wife. The idea for this video came from a discussion we had as a family. Following the trailer, my daughter and I were talking about a playable Zelda. As I mentioned, the trailer seemed, on the surface anyway, to remove this concept from the equation. As we pored over the video, my wife pointed out an obvious truth. Zelda is playable, just in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Initially, I dismissed the idea. Yeah, but that's not Breath of the Wild. But the more I thought about it, the more it got me curious.
I know that you are where you need to be.
Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity has been a major hit for Nintendo and was amongst the best-selling games on the Switch in 2020. Zelda, along with other characters like Impa, Urbosa, and Mipha, helped round out a roster of playable characters from diverse backgrounds. Not only was Zelda playable, she was also integral to the story. Playing the game and enjoying the excellent narrative, I think it's safe to say that Zelda's character owns Age of Calamity. We see her growth as a person, from feeling helpless to becoming a leader, and defying the odds stacked against her. Not only was her character more fleshed out, providing engagement from the player, her movesets, animations, combat capabilities, and interaction with the characters was all fully developed. Many have noted that Age of Calamity seemed to play more like Breath of the Wild in terms of look and feel than a typical Warriors title, and I tend to agree. Produced in conjunction with Nintendo, it's no surprise that many of the assets seemed on par, if not improved, from those within Breath of the Wild. So this begs another train of thought. What if this was also a testing ground for a playable Zelda? I mean, thinking about having this playable character, how does she move? What does she do in combat? How would she be animated in live gameplay outside of the cutscenes we've already seen? Well, Age of Calamity answers all of those questions, providing a full test run of how a playable Zelda could work in Breath of the Wild 2. Moreover, the commercial success of the game can be partially attributed to Zelda as a character, both in the way that she is playable and the story beats that are shown in the game. Now voiced, Zelda provides an opportunity for Nintendo to have a voiced protagonist without risking the character of Link and potentially upsetting many fans with giving him a quote-unquote personality. Zelda can interact with Link and help to provide the narration of the story, as well as providing a unique style of gameplay, for example, more focused on puzzle and technical solutions. Some, including Nintendo Black Crisis in his recent video, have suggested that Zelda could be an option to have playable in the caverns, for example, while Link is traversing the Sky Islands. It's easy to think of this as a risky move for Nintendo, but subtle hints have stared us in the face in the lead up to the recent trailer that have since proven critical in terms of what will happen in the next game. And this leads me to my next reason, the Red Dead connection. In an interview following E3 2019, and following on from the first trailer for the sequel, IGN interviewed Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma, who revealed that a lot of the younger members of the team had been playing Red Dead Redemption 2. When asked what games the younger staff on the Zelda team were playing, and specifically what inspired them, Aonuma replied, "Something I did hear that a lot of people were playing was Red Dead Redemption 2. For those who haven't played the game or heard about it, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a Western narrative set in 1899 and surrounding the tale of Arthur Morgan and the Van der Linde gang. The game is considered close to a masterpiece in gaming circles, uncompromising, compelling and artistic, helping it to achieve a 10 out of 10 by IGN and a score of 97 on Metacritic. Universally lauded by critics, the game has sold over 37 million copies as of March 2021. So why is the success of Red Dead Redemption 2 and the fact that members of the team were playing the game during the early stages of development for Breath of the Wild 2 important? Well, one simple fact, and a spoiler alert for anyone who has not played the game Red Dead Redemption 2 by the way. That fact is John Marsden. The epic story of Red Dead Redemption 2 surrounds Arthur Morgan and his tale of, well, redemption. Coming from a hard background and fueled by violence, we see Arthur's character undergo a transformation that culminates with his challenge of the very institution he had loyally followed under the leadership of Dutch van der Linde. Making this redemption more bittersweet is the death of Arthur, who, in his final throes, provides character John Marsden the impetus to change his lifestyle, settle down, and enjoy a family with his longtime love, Abigail. To the surprise of most players, myself included, Arthur's death does not signal the end of the game, but rather the onset of an epilogue, where the player takes control of John. I don't know about you, but for me this was surreal and groundbreaking at the time. I played the epilogue with a new level of enthusiasm. I wanted to embrace this new character and invest in him like I did Arthur. This move is one of the reasons Red Dead Redemption 2 was able to achieve such critical success. It challenged what we thought about typical gaming conventions and turned them upside down. And it did so to critical and commercial success. So if I was a developer at Nintendo, and I was thinking about pulling off something unexpected, like having a change in a playable character in an open world game full of masterful immersion, mystery, action and story, well, I think I'd be playing Red Dead Redemption 2 myself. Another point here is that aside from the change to John, Arthur's connection to his gang and the camp as a means for player and story progression in the game also provide more reasoning for employing Zelda in Link's story in Breath of the Wild 2. I mean, think about it. Am I the only one who thinks it would be wild to have a camp of sorts in Zelda? Maybe this camp could be a place that items could be stored to, help counter the whole breakable weapons thing in the first game. Or maybe even a place where you could repair broken weapons. Everyone loved Tarrytown, and the thought of a camp or base for our main characters in this new game would be a welcome mechanic for the sequel. Who wouldn't want to build up a homestead or village of their own? Maybe a new castle town, or your own Kakariko. The thought is exciting, and I dare say one that has crossed the minds of many fans and developers alike. Nintendo, if you're listening, please make this part of the game. But changing from Link as the only playable character is not what a Zelda game is about, I hear you say. That's not Zelda. Well, I would debate that Breath of the Wild has strayed far from what we think a Zelda game should be. From non-linear gameplay to player-driven narrative and an emphasis on multiple solutions to problems, Breath of the Wild has made a clear statement about what a Zelda game can be, which leads me to my next reason: challenging conventions. Apologies in advance for any mispronunciations. On the 10th of March 2017, heading into the throes of the release of Breath of the Wild, the core team of Hidemaru Fujibayashi, Satoru Takizawa, and Takahiro Dota presented at the GDC conference. The session was a best-in-class demonstration of how Nintendo approached the revolutionary mechanics at the heart of Breath of the Wild. If you have not seen the presentation, I highly recommend it, and I'll put the link in the description. Some key themes come up in the presentation. The core theme is all about breaking conventions, the courage to challenge the old and define a new style of gameplay. This is observed throughout the production process, from planning to development and refinement. Going further, Fujibayashi presents the challenges the team faced, with limitations on things like impassable walls, predetermined events, and, ultimately, predetermined outcomes. This is a point worth considering. What if Breath of the Wild 2 has potential for more than one outcome? The show goes on to talk about changing the player's engagement from passive to active, and that providing the right tools to the player, a new level of multiplicative gameplay can be reached, with infinite ways to reach a solution. We see this with countless videos on YouTube, with players still finding new techniques to traverse the environment or solve problems using the basic tools provided within the first few hours of the game. Going further, this concept is expanded with the solution about connecting everything in the game world. Let's pause on this for a second. Since the Curse of Demise, the connection between the elements of the Triforce has been universal and undying. It explains why Ganon never truly dies, and why having Zelda fall into a hole and sidelined for the rest of Breath of the Wild 2 makes literally no sense. The same conference also showed some unique concept art, some of which is not generally published. While some border on comical, like the alien invasion, one concept in particular, that of a one-armed multi-tool type Link, was shown amongst the many pieces of concept art. As it turns out, The recent trailer E3 at 2021 shows this concept brought to life. Another picture shows a floating castle with Ganon highlighted. Another prophetic image, perhaps? I don't think these notions are coincidence, and likely part of an overarching brainstorm that fleshed out ideas spanning more than one game. Another concept discussed in length by Mr. Dota is the physics and chemistry engine, which form the mechanics for game interactivity. A lot of effort has been put into these items, heavily linked with the Sheikah Slate. So, whilst the concept of Link's arm and the newly demonstrated powers like stasis reversal and fluid traversal look really cool, it would seem like a waste to remove the core mechanics that make Breath of the Wild so much fun, still to this day. I mean, who wants to lose stasis as it is now? Not me. No, I believe the developers, rather than replacing the options that are currently there, are more likely to add to them, creating an even more varied style to the players. I mean, who knows? Maybe Link has the arm and his new powers while Zelda retains the Sheikah Slate, an item she is already coupled with in Age of Calamity. This could provide her with options for problem-solving abilities, but also for combat as well. The Sheikah Slate was believed to contain further options for runes. Who knows? Maybe Zelda could also have a few new tricks up her sleeve. Having another playable character and expanding on the mechanics within the game would only enhance the options available to the player, further removing predetermined events and allowing choice. On a personal level, the thought of having options when it comes to characters with different mechanics is exciting. The same concept was applied to another successful Rockstar title, Grand Theft Auto V, with players being able to change the protagonist at will amongst an intertwined storyline. There were 3 options there and you could pick them at any time. If there was one game title possibly more successful as an open world sandbox than Red Dead Redemption 2, GTA 5 would have to be it. The gambles Rockstar made for both GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2 have paid off in terms of success, sales, and longevity. Embracing change, committing to something different, and ultimately growing in terms of gameplay and player engagement would have to be an attractive proposition for any game developer looking at the Rockstar success story. If Breath of the Wild started this movement towards true freedom by removing barriers in the game world for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, then it seems only likely that more change is in store with the sequel. Which leads me to my next and final reason, Aonuma and the Winds of Change. With the release of Skyward Sword, Nintendo released Hyrule Historia, a tome covering the history of the Legend of Zelda franchise and the first iteration of the much-debated timeline. This book released in 2011 in Japan and 2013 elsewhere, translated in a version from Dark Horse Comics. In March 2017, the Legend of Zelda Hyrule Encyclopedia was published, detailing even more information to flesh out the Zelda lore. With Skyward Sword tackling the origin story, it seemed like Nintendo were beginning to take the franchise lore more seriously, moreover planning where the series would be going. If it needed direction, an origin story was a good place to start. It was a marked response to requests from many fans to provide more information on the lore established within the games, to feed the hunger of a populace who were investing more and more into a game world that seemed to grow more mysterious with each iteration. And it made sense. Nintendo had developed something rare in today's gaming landscape, a lore and mythology rich in stories, traditions, symbols, and characters. In his interview in the Hyrule Encyclopedia, IG Aonuma responds to many questions surrounding the franchise and the more recent changes coming in Breath of the Wild, which was at that stage not yet released. Aonuma makes a number of interesting comments. Responding to the change in Link's appearance, considered sacred amongst some fans, Aonuma commented, "Even if that was also a tradition, there were a lot of opinions about it, and I still don't know what the truth of it is." However, by asking, "Why does Zelda have to be this way?" we find a reason to change things if we can't come up with a specific answer. Prompted further with, "What things did you decide you would not change?" Aonuma responds decisively and simply, "The element of growth." This concept he explains as the player growing, which is just as important as Link growing. His aim is to achieve growth within the player, and it lies at the core of his courage, the power to shake things up, make changes, and look to grow. In 2019, following the initial trailer of Breath of the Wild 2 at E3, Aonuma had an interview with IGN, and he was asked, "I know for a long time people have wanted to play as Zelda, and there have been some games where you get to play as Zelda for a little bit. It looked like Zelda and Link were hanging out a lot together. Do you think this is going to be the game which we get to play as Zelda? Maybe as a co-op game?" To this, Mr. Aonuma responded, "It's kind of interesting that you bring that up, because in Breath of the Wild, you see Zelda and Link together often too, so to go straight into the thought of co-op is very interesting to me." Kotaku's Jason Schreier asked Aonuma a similar question about playing as Zelda in an interview the next day. Aonuma said to him, "A lot of people have been asking that, and so I want to ask you, why do people think that?" Schreier responded saying she's free at the end of Breath of the Wild, and people have wanted to play as her for a long time. "I see," said Aonuma laughing, "but I can't tell you." I find this response interesting. I mean, why could Aonuma not answer this question directly? If Zelda would not be playable, or there were no plans to have a playable element of Zelda, even in a DLC aspect, then surely he could answer this question directly. Referring to the early quote from Horror Encyclopedia, if Aonuma and the team had decided this was something that would not change, then the division would be backed by a reason. You could argue that a good enough reason is that you play as Link in a Zelda game. But a counter-argument prior to Breath of the Wild would be that Link wears green garb, and the game has set dungeons, linear structure, and you obtain items to solve puzzles. The core mechanics mentioned here no longer exist as of Breath of the Wild, and the game has been heralded as a return to form, likely the best game in the series' history. So what reason could there be for not having Zelda as a playable character, albeit for a portion of the game or as an option? I say this as open-minded as I can, because any reason I can think of would sound, well,
I mean, it's just asinine.
closed-minded. I'd argue if the team had made that decision, Aonuma would have responded and provided a reason. My bet is that no such reason exists. So, in the spirit of player growth, the team are working on this very idea as part of Breath of the Wild 2. Maybe as part of DLC, who knows. It would also go a part of the way to explain the lengthy development time, considering the same game world is being used. To close out the video, I'd also challenge the current analysis presented for the trailers. A clear theme is noted in both trailers, and it's the passage of time. We have many factors to consider here. Audio on both trailers seems to have reversed portions playing over the video. And whilst the messages contained therein are debatable, I think everyone can agree that the audio reversal is being used definitively in both clips, which begs the question why. Physical changes reflect the passage of time as well, whether forward or back. For example, Zelda has a change of hair. We all know that one. Both Zelda and Link wear different apparel. Ganon appears as a shelled husk, or lich, if you also like the theory from Zeltic and Monster Mates. Another symbol of extensive passage of time. In the second trailer, Link appears to be wearing barbaric outfits. I'm not going to throw out the Z word here, but the clothing and shield symbols suggest something from another time is at play. Heck, even the bokoblins and moblins look different. It simply can't be directly following the first game. There's another thing too. One of Link's new powers, stasis reversal, as I like to think of it, has commonly been suggested to be a mechanic where Link rewinds the movement of the object based on the after images back up the hill. No matter how you slice this, it appears to be a time-based mechanic. And then finally, the disappearance of some key things like the Sheikah Shrines, towers, Divine Beasts, and even the Deku Tree call into question what's happening when you look at certain shots. Is it in the past? Is it the present? Either way, they don't seem to appear. And if it is the present, well, some time must have passed since the end of the first game until what we see in the trailer. I mean, I know I'm stating the obvious, but Sky Islands also suggest a change over time, with an event triggering their appearance in the sequel. So with these examples alone, is it so unrealistic to imagine that maybe, just maybe, when Zelda falls, it might not be as it appears? One idea is that it could be a dream. I mean, after all, Hyrule's royalty are known to have prophetic powers, and it wouldn't be the first time in the series that a dream sequence, or something similar, have demonstrated a dark situation that wasn't exactly real. Twilight Princess, anyone? Who can forget that scene? But I have a theory, and, well, it's just a theory of course, but it's that the order of events is not how it seems. I propose that the idea of Zelda falling does actually happen following a break in the bridge around Mummy Ganon. But in that scene, Link is nowhere near Zelda when she falls. The whole thing has bothered me a little bit. I mean, how is it that then Link grabs Zelda's hand only to drop her, when he's nowhere near her when the ground caves in? Well, what if when this happens the hand breaks from Ganon? Not to save Link or stop the malice that has corrupted him as many claim, but what if it attaches to Link because Zelda is falling and Link is about to dive into the chasm after her to save Zelda? I mean, it fits with his character. He's determined to follow the princess no matter what. And as Link dives, the hand grabs Link and fuses with him, exuding a power that reverses time, bringing the princess back up, where Link can then grab her hand. Now, I appreciate this seems speculative, but to be fair, so is every other theory out there. In this scenario, Link would retrieve Zelda from the abyss and bring her back into the game.
Now, I'm not saying this is fact. It's an opinion at best. It holds as much weight as the idea that the scene is a dream, or that Zelda survives the fall, or that Link needs to master a new set of powers to reverse time to stop this scene playing out at all.
What I do think though, based on the reasons provided in this video at least, is that Nintendo not capitalising on a golden opportunity to include Zelda more in Breath of the Wild 2, either as a playable character in part or at the very least an interactive participant in the gameplay, would be a missed opportunity. With fans clamouring for The Legend of Zelda to finally be about the titular character Zelda, Breath of the Wild 2 is the perfect vehicle for Zelda to make her own legend. So, what do you think? Do you think Zelda will be playable? Do you think Zelda falling is a diversion or a clever lie? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this video, please give a like or subscribe. Being the first serious video that I've done, your input would be greatly appreciated. A huge thanks for watching, and to my family, Team GameSmiths, for their support. Thanks for being amazing. So long, and see you soon.
So that's why it's a good thing it's gonna be us!